Welcome back to the home studio and welcome to episode 18 of the Stevie Richards Show. My name is Stevie Richards, if you didn't surmise that or assume that or presume that from the title of the show. We spent weeks coming up with the name of this show, and probably that was our most creative title. Not just myself. I put equal blame on my co-host, James. How are you doing? You look like Jupiter before the comet hit you.
Blinded? Right.
The future's bright, man. The future's bright. Look at this.
Well, the future's blinding, but only in certain spots. This room I'm in is nothing but windows, and the blinds that I have installed now have those tiny little gaps where the string needs to go through, and somehow it's sort of just...
You need blackout curtains. That's what I got over here, because I have the same problem where it bleeds through the blinds. You just buy moving blankets, or you go to Amazon, you buy regular blackout curtains. These things cost me like $20, and they're really, really good. You got to take all the light away before you add it in.
Oh, I understand.
It's a lot like heating the locker room, which we're going to talk about.
Oh, we'll be talking about that, absolutely. Well, let's do some plugs then. I have 2 books, One on Own Heart on the Rock. Links from the description, of course, as I always say. And Stevie Richards has the fitness channel. He has the analysis channel that might be changing up quite soon.
Want to talk about that in a second.
Oh,
yes,
yeah,
want to talk about
and most importantly of all, he has the Patreon channel as well, making brand new content, bringing up the Patreon once again for all subscribers, new and remaining from the first sort of a batch of content that you were posting on there. But how's the Patreon going?
It's going very well. I'm having a lot of fun sharing the exclusive behind-the-scenes content. This week we had another production meeting with Chris. I'm sure he's already getting tired of my OCD. And then John Worthy. People really like that song that played during the Patreon credits on the Wrestling Analysis channel. I had a call with him about possibly just getting the rights not only to that song, Never Lie to You, but also he in general. So we might actually have him on a future episode, drink everybody when we say that, future episode of the show to talk about the song and some of the origins, or I might do it on my own to put up on the channel as a quick little thing. We like supporting people that have their own pirate ship independently, and he's definitely one of those musicians that not only sings the songs, performs them, but also writes them as well. So he's definitely somebody like us that likes the freedom to be able to create and do what they need to do to create multiple streams of income. I do want to talk about the YouTube channel in a second, but first I want to thank my buddy Brandon. You can't really see it because it's right there, Star Trek. Got a new mug. I'm a huge Trekker and Trekkie. Usually it's a very polarizing thing. You got to be one or the other, but I can appreciate the original series. I appreciate your singing, which will be up on the Patreon for the pre-show.
I can do it again for you. I can do it again for you if you like.
No, we don't want any copyright strikes. They just, dude, I used a song 5 years ago. I just got a copyright strike on my fitness channel. Before it was a fitness channel, it was a drone review. So the Phantom 3, that's how long ago that was. But I want to thank Brandon for that. And there's other studio things I'm going to hang up. But the channel, this is where, before we get into the subject, which the episode 18 is surviving the locker room. Survive if I let you, beat me if you can. It's reversed in Taz's case, but we don't want a copyright strike from Taz either. But as far as the channel, we had an off-camera pre-production conversation. You still think the gaming / kind of tech, mix between the gaming and a little bit of the behind-the-scenes stuff with the products we use is probably the way to go to reactivate the channel. I'm a big fan of like the Y-Files, paranormal, and other stuff like that. And you, being the SEO expert that you are, told me that's probably not the NFL was the other one. American football, talking about that. But I'm not sure if that's even in my wheelhouse with the audience we have.
Yeah, I think the gaming and tech, and especially with gaming, with wrestling games, and then sort of branch off from there, I think that'll be a less of a sort of a jarring change in content from what you were doing previously to whatever, the other 2 things as well. That, in my opinion, but we did almost as a tester really for episode 17. We did some gaming stuff. We talked about all the games you were in. We talked about the No Mercy story. We talked about top 5s and bottom 5s of games. It was all wrestling game related, of course, but videos did pretty well. And we got a lot of feedback positive from that as well. So I sort of figured from there that I thought maybe a full-on dedicated gaming channel on your off days from, the Stevie Richards show might do well for you. Plus, you've got to get some content on that damn channel soon anyway.
You laugh. That's like me saying you have days off.
Yeah, I remember I had one once.
Yeah,
And do you know
once,
what's awful
sometime.
is that the very rare days I get a day off, I cannot figure out what to do with myself. So I just
No,
end up
I'm the
working
same way.
anyway.
We very much have kind of linked enjoyment with productivity. I think and those kind of go hand in hand. If we're not being productive and doing something or making some kind of progress. Here's a little spoiler for everybody out there. I believe, even though wrestling games are one thing, most of the comments on episode 17 were about my favorite and what I believe is the best football game. In your case, I'll say American football game ever made. ESPN NFL 2K5. And that gets a lot of views and interaction as well. Like every year, Soft Drinks Sports TV, one of my favorite gaming channels, puts out every time Madden comes out how terrible it is and how this game is still good. I think my first video will be ESPN NFL 2K5 is still the best football game in 2024. I think that'll be a good launching pad for that. And I think the wrestling games, like this week, I think live streams, like once a week, maybe live streaming a wrestling game or something that, like if something happened on Raw, we recreated in the game. You're right. There's a lot of different opportunities to be creative with that.
I think so. Just don't play any baseball games, for goodness sake. Especially if there's some sort of competition with them.
What are you talking about? What was that
Oh,
reaction?
MLB. Which one was it?
Oh, the MLB 2K11. Oh, there's video number 2. How I pitched the perfect game and didn't get the $1 million.
We're saving that for this show though, because I want to know the full story. Because we are going to do a gaming part 2, definitely, of this show. So we've got to have that. We've got to have other rumors circulating maybe as well about various games. But there's so much that we didn't touch on that I definitely want to do a part 2 as well, just because games are fun. And occasionally we talk about stuff that isn't fun. Or,
Sure as hell not fun to relive them. Thank you.
Yeah.
Ha ha. There we go. Ha ha. I'll get them on your show sooner or later.
Well, that was for the Patreon fans. We have to do very briefly a correction from last week, and then we'll get to a news story, and then we're going to talk about something that you really didn't want to talk about this week. It is our main subject, and it is surviving the locker room. But briefly, I have to say we have a correction from last week's show. You said, instead of me breaking out into an Oasis song, you said, anyway, the SmackDown game that you said you were just like either a backstage character and you never got paid for was not SmackDown 2. You were a fully playable character in SmackDown 2. Also, not as coincidentally, but around this time, as we discussed last week, Big Show was taken out of WWF No Mercy. Big Show was already also taken out of SmackDown 2 as punishment as well. So he lost a lot of money that year, I'm sure. But you were in SmackDown 1, not in it, but your face was, your clothes were, and maybe some of your moves as well. So basically, you can make a creator wrestler of Stevie Richards in SmackDown 1 if you so desired. But somehow that sort of gets around the likeness and trademarks and copyrights you have on yourself, so therefore they paid you no money because you were due none, which I think is a very snidey workaround of doing it that way.
Well, that was probably the original way before the DLC era started, because there wasn't DLC back then. If you had your, like every part except for your right wrist tape, then you couldn't be, paid for that. But yeah, the creative wrestler was definitely, I think even in the WWE 2K games, lots of people created the BWO as their first community creation, or they downloaded. As a matter of fact, I think it was 13 or 14 was like, people said that was the best one because it truly was like Fire Pro. One of the things I loved about Fire Pro Wrestling in the series was the customization and to be able to add and, do different things like that. I think 13 was the one people said was the best WWE game ever made because of that community type of creations and download center. But that's how they got around it as well, because they put the face or the outfit or something like the outfit, and you can add the BWO logo on the shirt, and then you don't need to get paid.
Do you ever, not that you're sitting around waiting by the phone hoping for it, but I was thinking there've been some sort of odd additions as far as DLC or just included on the main roster. And I know for a reason why this person I've got in my mind was, but there was a Steve Austin, I don't know if it was like 2K16 or around that era, I guess, where there was like a Steve Austin from beginning to end storyline and within the game. And Mikey Whipwreck was included in that game because obviously, with the ECW, put a brief ECW portion of Steve Austin's career, he ends up losing to Mikey Whipwreck, I believe.
Yeah,
And
Mikey schoolboyed him and pulled his tights and his butt crack came out and everything. Yeah. Yeah, Steve. Well, that was part of his story. That was part of the whole thing. So it made sense to put Mikey Whipwreck in there. And I hope Mikey got paid. There might be another little kind of a loophole in that particular thing because he wasn't in the game for more than 3 minutes or whatever. So you don't, they get around it. They're very clever that way. So, but what was your question about me getting in any kind of video game?
oh, do you ever think that the BWO or maybe you might find themselves in a future 2K game?
No, never. I think the action figure thing, and we got an action figure episode coming up you can say it, James.
In a future episode, when you buy them, I've been harping on at you for about 6 weeks. You've got to go on eBay or
I got to
flea
go buy
market or
them.
whatever.
I said I would. I said I would.
I've got three. You can't see because I've blurred the background, but I've got three of your figures dotted around on one of the shelves next to Sabu and Don Morocco and Dutch Mantel in the
I
background.
see everything, brother. I see everything, as Taz would say. So, with that being said, the action figures is even more. Just give you a little preview of that episode. The BWO thing is kind of hard with action figures because there's not many 3-packs out there. I think it would sell incredibly well. Nova and Meanie agree with that, but that's why we've never had a 3-pack, and we're kind of trying to, in the backstage type of thing, trying to politic. We don't have Peter or anybody else at Jack Specific as our kind of like go-to people, in a positive political way. But I think it's going to eventually happen. But as far as the BWO storyline or me in general, nah, man, I'm persona non grata with that company. As when people say you're not a pariah, there I can pronounce it. We have a story coming up about my spine infection, probably on the anniversary that it happened, in the coming months, where those actions kind of prove my point. And that's cool. Like I said at the end of our Right to Censor one, I don't fit in, I'm different, but it allows me the freedom to do whatever I want without being in the boxed into that stereotype of professional wrestling.
Or that you have to be careful of what you're saying, to a point anyway. Which sort of leads us onto the one news story we're going to be talking about before we talk about locker room stuff and wrestlers' court and people banned from the locker room. We've got tons of backstage stuff coming up on this show. But one bit of news, I always like to slip in one bit of news. Vince McMahon's culture of fear. So I guess for people like you and I, you especially, since you were there in the company, probably witnessed some things here and there, with writers and interactions and Vince McMahon. Someone like me who, as a fan, reads these things online, talks to people within the business, and I've got a decent idea of what's going on. So between you and I, we're looking at this and thinking, yeah, well, we already knew all that. But for the wider public, this probably seems completely insane, and maybe it is. Maybe we're just in the bubble too much, I guess, and we've just heard it too many times. But Rolling Stone did an interview with a number of former WWE writers, creative writers. One gave their name and everyone else wanted to remain anonymous. And basically, it was a kiss and tell on working for Vince McMahon and the culture of fear. Here's a quote. I'll give you a couple of quotes and I can carry on a bit further until you're sick of me talking. WWE, quote, is a kingdom ruled by fear. It is the motivating factor everywhere. Fear, one writer said. There was a very heavy layer of fear and tension, and that was directly from Vince. And the culture that he created obviously created a lot of problems. The writers all agreed that the culture of fear spread throughout the company from the writers' room to the road, all the way to the promotion's headquarters, where they all witnessed varying degrees of verbal abuse. One more quote, and I'll stop talking. Everybody was getting yelled at all the time in the room, one former writer said. It was more saying stuff, I'm editing myself, that was humiliating or mean, couched as a joke, but it's a nasty joke. If you're being targeted in a room, nobody stands up for you, but that's because if they do, they will get the bullet in the head too. You don't stick your head up out the foxhole for anybody because nobody wants to take the bullet. Despite this, some people who were loyal to Vince McMahon cause more issues for employees. So what I've said, what you're reading there. Did you see any of these kinds of interactions between Vince and non-wrestler creative staff that sort of lends credence to these claims?
Yeah, absolutely. I sat in on a few production meetings. There was an era, and we can talk about rules and stuff like that. There was an era where they encouraged certain wrestlers, if you want to sit in on production meetings in the back and just kind of be a fly on the wall, you can do that. They instantly kind of regretted that because they could look in the back, and I'm sure they were going to talk about at one point or another, some of the people like myself and Dreamer, I think, sat in on a 2 or 3, and then we're like, okay, they're obviously self-censoring, or they're trying to wait till we leave to make fun of us or do whatever. We just get that feeling. But you can see that everybody, there was that uncomfortable when Vince would be like, anybody have anything to say about this or that? There'd be like that 5 to 10 seconds, people looking around like, who's going to be the first one to see if Vince is in the mood for feedback or ideas or anything like that. It was very much a, the emperor has no clothes type of thing where you have to really put him over. There's also times where Vince would just eat and people would just be sitting there waiting for him to stop eating. Like, it was very strange. And that was before like the script ripping at 4 and 6 p.m. and over the past few years. We're talking about when I was there up until 2008. And I wasn't there every single week. But yeah, there was a point where writers were just like, you could tell they were very shell-shocked and gun-shy at the same time when they would come out. And then some writers would kind of pass it along or kind of like project whatever they got onto you a little bit, depending upon who you are on the card, obviously. And then obviously people had their favorites that they can never, you got Triple H sitting like right next to Vince or 2 down from him. He's not going to criticize Triple H, and no one's going to criticize Triple H. That's the fear. Yeah, of course. Vince is the person, for good or bad. Vince, it's his vision. Vince is the final word. And we see kind of in AEW, not more than kind of, when it's the Wild West and you can't go and get that final word from Tony Khan, that you have all these cliques and sleeper cells, and there's all these different companies ran within the company. Now, Vince also had the writers, the agents, and everybody, and still to this day, I'm sure Triple H and other people use the writers, the agents, anybody in middle management or lower management between the wrestlers and the upper management and ownership as the sounding board, the deflection, the good cop, bad cop type thing. That used to be the JR and JJ Dillon and Johnny Ace roles where, it's Johnny's fault or it's JR's fault or it's JJ Dillon's fault. It's not Vince. He delegates that to them, but really, it's coming from Vince, Stephanie, and whoever else is truly in charge. So I would say the culture of fear, the kingdom of fear, whatever you want to call it, it's not exaggerated. Here's the weird thing about pro wrestling in general, entertainment and sports. Let's just talk about across the board. You can get treated like these people got treated, and then only one person post WWE is even still willing to give their name and attach it to the truth. You know why? Because deep down, each and every person is still waiting for the call, hoping for one more run, and doesn't want to. The only one I give really, truly credit for in 2 different ways, both WWE and the XFL, is Jonathan Coachman, is speaking the truth. And I don't know why Jonathan Coachman, he was on Madden at the halftime show. He was a part of ESPN. I don't know why John is not part of a mainstream sports program or running his own pirate ship with sports, because the coach, man, he was somebody that really, really gave his heart and soul to WWE and even XFL and got screwed over doubly for it.
Take a shot. That's a story for another time. Oh, there was something else I wanted to mention, was the Todd Grisham thing. Did you see this a couple of weeks ago about Christian?
I did not see it. The thumbnail came up from the Solo Monster, which I watched some of his stuff. He's got a good presentation on YouTube. And I saw that. My wife saw it, and she goes, "Do you know this guy?" And I go, "Oh, yeah, he was part of Stevie Night Heat. He was one of the guys along with Al Stone, as we called him, and Coach, once again. Coach was an integral part of making Stevie Night Heat a reality. And he took a terrible chance, but he's like, this is good stuff." So Todd was right along with that. But please, Bring me up to speed on what Todd said in that video. I'm sorry I didn't watch it first.
Well, very vaguely speaking, this is 2 weeks ago. I think the point was is that Todd Grisham was meant to introduce Christian out to the ring for an interview, and just before Todd went out, Vince McMahon grabbed him and told Todd to introduce Christian in his most monotone way as humanly possible, as a rib, as some sort of more grand plan. We don't know. Somehow that got massive traction. That one little story that Todd Grisham said on Twitter, I think, as well. But it's just one more thing that Vince. I don't know if Vince is always trying to keep people on their toes. If Vince just thought it was a funny prank or something like that. I just wanted to mention that. But there's something that you said beforehand that is very, very telling. Was well, Vince loved me, but he would delegate it to Jim Ross or JJ or whoever else or John Laurinaitis. I can't. Maybe it was Rick Boogs or someone like that who kept saying, "Well, after they'd been fired, well, Vince McMahon loved me. He was a big fan of mine, but there were other pals in there that eventually saw me be released from WWE." And I sort of think, dude, Vince is WWE. Vince decides all of these things. No one else is firing you. So I don't know why a lot of these people kid themselves into thinking that Vince is a big fan of theirs just after they got rid of him.
Well, there's a degree of truth to that, and I know that personally. Number one, I've explained before how this old man wakes up, and even when he was still in his 50s back in the day, we called him the old man sometimes. He would wake up, love your work for 4 to 6 weeks, hate your work for 3 months, love your work for another 4 months, and guess what happened to your work during that whole time? It never changed. So it's just like how he woke up. Also, how I got released, or the word I heard of how I got released, was not any heat, not any kind of budget stuff. They said it was budget, but I was making $75 a year. So what happened was, and this was from 3 different people that were sitting in on that meeting or were in the office at the time. Vince would say a name. He would say Stevie Richards. And usually, kind of like clockwork, somebody, maybe not the same person, but they'd be like, yeah, we got this guy debuting this week. We think Stevie would be great to work the house shows and then work his first match on TV. Vince was like, okay, cool, do that. They'd put a pin in that, whatever he would say. And every week it would be, the names would come across from Vince or somebody next to Vince, go around the whole table with Michael Hayes or Bruce Pritchard, whoever's writing, whoever's in on this meeting. And if someone said, oh yeah, we want him to do this, we got this plan, or, Stevie's been working hard, let's put him in OVW, whatever it might be, you keep your job for another week or until your name is brought up again. I think it was August 15th, 2008 was my official release date, but it might have been the day before that this meeting happened, 2 days, 3 days, whatever. I'm not privy to that. Vince said my name. Nobody said anything. And he goes, okay, cut him or release him. That's exactly how your whole entire life and career can change in a moment of silence. And that's just secondhand information, but that's what I can believe that happens, because there was people even before that said, like I think of Michael Hayes one time said, oh, your name came up in the, thing. And I brought up and I said, I had this for you and saved your job for another week. You don't just say that for whatever reason. So that's kind of a culture there. And that is a culture of fear, because maybe somebody was afraid to speak up and say, or they thought, well, I don't want to, this isn't my hill to die on. I have another talent that I could, and for all I know, another talent during that meeting before, or maybe a month or a year before, my name came up. They vouched for it. Another name came up that they really liked, but like, I already said Stevie's needed for something. I can't speak up twice. That's the culture of fear.
The mood of Vince McMahon now. Dutch Mantel on Storytime with Dutch Mantel, which is still on hiatus, but hopefully won't be for very long.
Get well soon, Dutch.
Yeah, the mood of Vince McMahon. He always said he gauged whether Vince was in a good mood or a bad mood. He looked at the writers, or he stuck his head in the writers' room, and if they were happy, Vince was in a good mood. If they were sad or pensive or anxious, he knew that Vince McMahon was on a rampage and not to bother Vince. Is that something that you noticed during your tenure there as well?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. That's why I just avoided a lot of these people altogether. Because if you're eventually going to pick the wrong time from a previous thing where Vince was super jolly, friendly, hey pal, and patting you on the back and grabbing your bicep or whatever this thing's called right here. It's smaller than a bicep, but then you're like you get that false sense of comfort and security around him, like. Yeah, Vince likes my stuff, and then he just has nothing to do with you. It could be the stock price. You got to think this guy's going through 1,000 different types of business dealings, then a stock, then this and that, and who knows what investigations were coming along here and there that nobody even knew about. He could have had to deal with the SEC after dumping a lot of stock after a quarterly call, or they could have had him on the radar. There could have been all sorts of stressors. I mean, future episode, here we go, drink again. I think the maddest and the way he legitimately was like trying to get me to beat me up was the day after Unforgiven against Tomko. And that whole thing was his idea, which originated with drainy panties coming out of his suit jacket, which should have been in the documentary.
Oh God, that documentary as well. I mean, I was just thinking, Vince McMahon has clearly no self-awareness, because if you're trying to paint yourself as somebody who has not assaulted a woman, the first thing you do is, well, you can say that you slept with Rita Chatterton, but then what you don't follow that up with is, well, and even if I did assault her, then the statute of limitations is up anyway, so who cares?
Did he say that?
Not quite who cares, but he did actually say, and even if I did, the statute of limitations would run out. And it's just like, well, that's what an innocent person would say. Has he got no self-awareness, this man?
Well, it depends on which brain. I heard he has 3 different brains that are working all at the same time.
The one in his the one in his bottom was working overtime when he made that ridiculous comment. I just some of the things he said on that anyway. But I want to give you a couple more quotes from this.
I want to say something real quick about that. This is the very dangerous thing. Not only we're giving examples of this because at that time WWE and Vince himself were not hungry like they were during the Monday Night Wars. They didn't have any time to play these games, although the political games were still there, especially amongst Pat Pattersons, the Bruce Pritchards, and everybody else in the inner circle. But Vince was fighting for his life, WWE's life, all that, both the financial survival of himself and the company. So he would let the wrestlers have opportunities and wouldn't play these games, these power games, to this extent at least. They were always there. But when you're a billionaire and the company is making money, especially now making money hand over fist for phoning it in each and every week, you can play these games with people's lives and not worry about it. So that's the difference. And that's why Vince during the documentary feels like I can make all these statements because guess what? Once again, I use the analogy. The emperor has no clothes. If someone's not, like, there has to be somebody not afraid to say, Vince, your idea sucks. And I don't think anybody's ever said that. I mean, I give Russo credit. Russo has said it right to his face. The product sucks. And that's how he got the head writer job. He was the one guy to speak up. And Vince was in such a position, he's like, I don't know what to do. And put the magazine down and said, this needs to be the show. So you can blame Vince McMahon for Vince Russo if you hate Vince Russo so much.
I'm going to give you a couple more bits from this and then we'll move on. This isn't a quote, but it's part of the article. Meanwhile, veterans like Mick Foley, by the way, this writer was by Wrestling Inc. Veterans like Mick Foley praised him being Vince McMahon, for giving them an opportunity to be the stars they are today. And it goes on to talk about loyalists. And now, obviously, nothing has been proved in a court of law or even civil court yet, but there are some pretty damning allegations in the fact that he spent nearly $20 million on non-disclosure agreements for very specific reasons. I know there's like Mark Henry out there, Kevin Nash out there, some people who just won't speak up publicly to defend Vince, but I'm sure a lot of people will defend Vince in this kind of thing. Mick Foley bugs me because he at one point worked for a charity to help battered women and victims of assault, yet he's taking Vince's side on this automatically when, at the very least, he should be neutral on that. I always thought that was a weird one for Mick to sort of stick up just because he pushed him, I guess.
The only analogies I can think of, there's three in particular. If you ever watched the movie Shawshank Redemption,
Love it.
and people being institutionalized in jail and being afraid to go out into the real world, Stockholm syndrome. You actually start to love your captors. You start to have affection for them and care, and you really you almost look at it like, well, they treated me bad 95% of the time. But man, when they treated me good for 5%, I mean, it was just the best I ever got treated. Then there's another one with the Matrix called the Agent Smith effect, where basically you're defending the system. So you mix all those together, and that's where this comes into play. Now, I have the Star Trek mug here, so this is a good analogy. I would watch a lot of videos of people from the next generation, even the original series, talking about, and even though he was flawed as a human being from what I hear in his personal life, how amazing Gene Roddenberry was to work with on Star Trek, how much fun it was. Now, it was stressful, and you're 16, 18, 20-hour days, but it was just, he had such a passion for it, but he also didn't rule by fear. He ruled by, he wanted everybody to enjoy themselves, and if what Michael Dorn did, Lieutenant Worf, and couldn't quite get the voice down, but when he got it down, it wasn't Gene Roddenberry's idea on how the voice was supposed to sound. But when he heard it, he goes, you got it. Keep going with that. Just that little bit. I don't think Vince can do that because the entire culture of WWE is, okay, it's a good idea, but it's not mine. So therefore, I must destroy it or figure out a way to twist it or use it 6 months from now as my idea.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, if you can somehow convince Vince that it was his idea.
That's 90% of the energy you spend in wrestling is convincing them your idea is their idea. That's why it's so exhausting. Not to cut you off. I just feel like it's just in this thing. Okay, Mick Foley got the opportunity from Vince. But dare I say, I think Mick gave Vince and WWE and wrestling way more than the wrestling gave him, because Mick's still the one barely walking and dealing with the physical stuff. Nobody owes anybody anything at the end of the day. Once I was released, they don't owe me a damn thing, and I don't owe them a damn thing. It's over. And I need to move on. And I think that's where a lot of wrestlers still have that grip or affinity or the weaponized hope that I might get booked again someday by these people. Sure, they're horrible people, but man, I might get booked one day.
Dennis Stamp on a trampoline doing the weights.
Oh, yeah. I'm not booked, Terry.
Yeah, I'm not booked. But he even said in Beyond the Mat, he was like, you never know when they're going to call. And it's like, dude, you're in your mid-50s. You're in your mid-50s doing weights on a trampoline. It's weird. It's weird that you would even strip off into your trunks and do that on camera, let alone think that the stupid light, WWE would come a-calling. One more thing I'll mention on the article.
Wait, what happened in Beyond the Mat, though? What happened after that? He got booked.
Well, for Terry, he did.
He got booked.
He was doing painting at the arena or they were going to be working at, and weren't they? I'm
not sure. He was the referee for the match against Brett.
He was. He was that.
Yes.
Were you on that card, or was that? No, that was after you left, wasn't it?
No, I wasn't on that card. That was Brett versus Terry. A lot of ECW guys were there. Paul did a speech. It was great for one of the first 3 retirements. I mean, I think it was awesome.
Oh, for Terry, that was at least his third. That was his third.
That was the second or third. The first one was barely legal. The last run, but guess
that was
what?
his third. That was his third, because he retired.
What, barely legal was the third retirement?
Yeah, yeah, because he retired, or claimed he was retired before the famous one in Japan where he goes forever, forever, forever. That's
yes.
the famous one, but that's the second retirement. There was one before that wasn't very well publicized, and he left for half a year or a year or something.
Wasn't the one in WCW the retirement where he was commentating and came out of retirement to do one of the best matches I've ever seen, the I Quit match in New York, Troy, New York against Flair, Clash of Champions.
It's a great. Actually, I had that DVD on the Ric Flair 3-disc DVD set before there was any WWE Network or even that over the top. Because WWE before the network used to publish matches and stuff as a paid tier on the website for years before the network as well, and they had some really good shows on that. I just want to mention one more thing very briefly. All it is talking about is An example of what would be said by these people in high positions was something along the lines of, and I will clean this up, I wish your dad had pulled out and aimed it somewhere else instead of having you. This was described by one writer as locker room talk, which got more volatile, and the more they had to deal with people in McMahon's inner circle. Trying to get ahead in WWE by impressing Vince McMahon didn't always lead to promotions and salary raises. In fact, some of these positions that were being jockeyed for ended up having people turn on each other in order to benefit themselves. One former writer even described the writers' room culture in WWE as being mafia style when it came to its leadership. Quote, if you do one thing, you're peeing off three other people who are higher up than you, who are going to chew you out, get angry, or seek revenge. All of this led to a very odd and unsettling experience while being in the writer's room. So I know this is more office-based stuff, but what's the upside to all this? What's the end goal? You're just going to get a load of people in an office hating each other, distrusting each other. That surely can't be good for productivity. Or in Vince's mind, is this something like competition is great, only the toughest survive kind of thing?
The law of the jungle type
Yeah, the
thing,
law of
right?
the jungle, yeah.
By the way, this quote, when this was Vince or some people, if it's Vince, saying, I wish your dad pulled out and whatever, that sounds like projection from Vince's childhood where he was very abused. I think a lot of Vince's behavior is based on how he was treated growing up and what happened to him. And he just kind of maybe takes it out, or he feels like he needs to expel whatever demons he's carrying around onto other people. It's an ultimate form of projection. What I will say is, from personal experience, whatever happens in professional wrestling, and especially whatever happens in WWE, it really makes your life afterwards so much easier when you can control your narrative, when you can control your income. But one of the things I feared most when I was in wrestling was having meetings with people that are in powerful positions like Vince or the agents. There would be meetings once in a while. I'd be called into Vince's office, whatever it might be. Even once or twice, you just never know what's going to happen. So you almost have to prepare, and then you go through the wrestling thing throughout the week, especially if they're saying, hey, when you come to TV, Vince wants to meet with you. They know 4 to 5 days you're doing this insane choose your own adventure to try to say, well, if he says this, I'll say this. If he says, or I make sure I don't say this, do I bring notes? Do I sit there? What do I wear? It's insane. But now, like, dude, most of my stuff with the fitness business and the things we do and stuff, trying to talk about getting sponsors and everything, I revel in the fact if I get somebody on a Zoom or StreamYard call or a FaceTime call, I'm like, I can convert this. I have total confidence because it literally, there's no yes men, no agents, no writers. It's me and whoever. And I don't have a 100% success rate, but it's a great feeling that it can't be any more stressful or hard than the experience I had with wrestling. It's really a great feeling. I mean, it sucks during it, but you almost got sharpened for post wrestling in a lot of ways. But yeah, this is complete BS though. The business is hard enough. I've said this a million times, maybe not on this show. Doing this is hard enough without somebody purposely trying to make it harder on you.
Okay, so we've talked about Vince McMahon and the culture of fear. Now, something else to be afraid of, I guess, is being a new wrestler in a professional wrestling locker room. And I'm sure a lot of people watching and listening know that it could be some tricky waters to navigate. You know, there are going to be some rules that you're not so sure of, or etiquette that you may not have brushed up on or been told about, quite frankly. That's part of the game, I guess. See what you know and see what you don't, and see how you react. And this is something, Stevie, that when I suggested this to you as a topic, you were like, oh, can't we do something else instead? So, not your favorite topic then, but locker room rules if you're a newbie. I guess before we talk about WWE, we will talk about WWE specifically, but what was the first like major-ish locker room that you found yourself in? Was it ECW or different kind of indies at that point? And when do you start learning the major points that you need to do every single time?
Yeah, ECW was the first like TV, even though it was local at the time, or Fiat, it wasn't what it was when it really expanded on, say, TNN, we were very much on local syndicated channels at like 2 a.m. most times because we could, if people actually found out about it, too many people, we would have been taken off the air. But I learned everything the hard way, by the way. I wasn't a second, third generation. I didn't have anybody that really clued me in during wrestling training about certain etiquette and this and that. I would just get kind of instantly punished and have to kind of try to figure it out. And then there were times where Dreamer, to his credit, would kind of smart me up a little bit or give me a little clue what was going on. My first faux pas in the locker room, and I still do this today, by the way, if I'm in a locker room, which is really amazing. I haven't been in one in a while, but I was sitting in a chair. I didn't know about even if there's 100 open chairs and you're sitting in the one chair that, you're occupying when everything else is empty. When a veteran or anybody who has more experience than you, or in my case, even a lady, I just crossed the board, you give your seat up. And Dean Malenko had walked by a couple times, maybe to try to clue me in, but I was getting dressed or whatever, and he literally kicked me out of the chair and called me a dumb F or whatever, and he was right at the time. I mean, Dean turned out to be one of the biggest jerks I've ever dealt with in wrestling later on, even after I was clued in. But he was right in that particular type of thing. It wasn't so much there's 100 open chairs there. It was just literally an old school gesture of respect for a veteran. And that's, on top of the handshaking and saying hello to everybody individually, even if you just saw them the day before back then, the giving up the chair or giving up the spot, or, then the locker room is an expansion of that. That's a whole nother world of where do you dress and where do you not dress. I got some good stories about I would dress with the locals by choice, not because I was punished or anything, but that was my first initiation into what locker room etiquette was supposed to be.
Now, this is something that has changed over the years, and I've heard actually quite a lot of different versions about this, but what were you taught, at least when you broke into the business, the etiquette around handshakes?
Well, I wasn't taught. I learned that the hard way as well. And somebody who I'm really friendly with today, and we actually talk about working out and saunas and everything, Taz. I remember I think it was Hazleton, Pennsylvania or something. And I was doing the handshake thing, but then I saw everybody the night before. We had two house shows or two shows in general that week. And I walked in and, Taz and everybody were kind of sitting there. And I walked up and I looked around and I go, hey, everybody, how's everybody doing? And, good to see everybody or whatever I said. Taz and Perry Saturn gave me such a look like I could have died right there if looks could kill. But then I went up and then Taz walked by me and I said something like, hey, Taz, what's going on, man? Because he didn't say anything to me. And he was like, get the F away from me, brother, and kind of shoved me up against the locker. It's like, what did I do? And Dreamer's like, well, you didn't shake everybody's hand. And I was like, I just did it yesterday, like last night, less than 24 hours ago. And that's where I was clued in that even if it's like the show and then you go out to eat, more times than not, you still got to do the handshake back then. If you got the show and then an early morning flight, you shake everybody's hand there again. Now, I see the benefit of that because, there's a lot of different cultural changes in the locker room that you can look at the bad of the old way of doing things, but then you can look and see without some of those elements or some of those guardrails that things can get way, way out of control, as Punk has talked about with the AEW locker room. Happy medium will be great, but I think in the world of professional wrestling, there is no happy medium. It's a world of extremes, one way or the other. So I get it, and I kind of got it back then, that you kind of have to keep yourself in check. And also, I think, in a way, and I'm not justifying, because, dude, at the time, like I said about the Godfather stuff, you go through this thing, you're like, what did I do? And that's the most, stressful, depressing kind of thought that goes through your mind, and it never leaves. So when I'm looking at that, I'm saying, I do understand in a way the overarching, say, metaphor of this. Shake hands every day. Make sure you show respect every day. Make sure you keep yourself humble every day. In other words, you always have the next match to either redeem yourself or screw yourself over even more. Don't get too cocky. So that's how I would explain it to people that are newbies in there. Like, just understand the overarching 10,000-foot type of look at the entire business and how you're sharpening yourself to stay humble and, more importantly, stay hungry each and every day. That's I guess the best way to kind of interpret it now, 30 some years later.
With okay, I'm going to bring this to me just as an example. So I've obviously I had no interest in getting into professional wrestling as a performer or anything like that. I always wanted to do. I'll tell you what, I always wanted to be in
That's
radio
the
for
smartest
some
thing
reason.
you've ever said, James.
Yeah, no, in fairness, I always wanted to be in radio, and I never really pursued it either, and I just ended up doing a bunch of stupid jobs for years. But having said that, I would have really struggled with, among many things, one, locker room atmosphere. I think at the time, not now. You know, you grow up, you grow older, you get used to these kinds of things. But number two is the absolute deference that you've got to show the veterans. I mean, I completely understand showing people respect for people who are better than you, older than you, more seasoned than you, and you want to get their knowledge. But it's almost like you've got to bend the knee constantly for anyone who's been in the business longer than you. And one, I'd find that exhausting. And two, I'd resent that really quickly. So, I mean, is that something you just have to it's almost like being in the army. You've got to be broken down to be built up again in the wrestling business's image to get used to.
I think there's very much a military chain of command type thing with it, but it all depends. Now, you can look at it like some people say I always say, like, how do you know a locker room leader? Or how do you know who's not a locker room leader? The people that outwardly tell you all the time they're locker room leaders. That's kind of the way I always looked at it. But also at the same time, it's a form of idolatry. You have to idolize them. You have to do that. And everybody in the business, including myself, are flawed human beings, even more so than normal people. Insecurity, jealousy, mixed with politics, mixed with spot protecting, mixed with, the backstabbing, the cutthroat stuff. And that's where, like, as it goes on, one of my biggest arguments with Vince McMahon all the time, whenever he was very honest, he was like, you're not enough of an asshole. You don't cut enough throats. You don't show me ruthless aggression. That ruthless aggression era was a shoot. There were meetings about that. And he was like, you're never going to get anywhere if you don't show that to me. And I said, well, Vince, I'm not that type of guy. And he was very honest. Well, you're not going to get very far here. And he was right. He was right. But I have to carry myself as a man every day, as a flawed man trying to improve, and look myself in the mirror. If I had done the things that the locker room or Vince or other people had dictated, like turn on your friend, talk shit about your friend, bury your friend, your friend has heat, why are you talking to him? And we can talk about like how it has very much a high school cafeteria type of environment. And we can get to that whenever. I think there's a good segment here where I can talk about people would get on Glenn. Why are you friends with that? Basically, why are you friends with a jobber? Or why are you friends with that guy lower in the car? Why do you travel with him? They would ask that question right in front of me as if I wasn't even there. I guess I just told the story. Now people are wondering why I'm friends with Glenn. So it's all come full circle.
Okay, before we get off the handshake,
it really, I can tell. I'm sorry to cut you off. You're a normal person with normal thought processes or processes, as you would say in English.
The more over the decades I've learned about how professional wrestling works behind the scenes, it makes me think, one, well, I obviously did the right thing by never ever trying to pursue anything related to it, even for a bit of fun doing ring announcing or helping set the ring up or anything. I mean, as much as I loved professional wrestling. But I just think if I was in that position, and once again, it's not about me, but I'm just giving an example, is that I wouldn't, at my age now, I wouldn't rebel against it. I'm above that. Do you know what I mean? It's because I'm a grown man who doesn't need to be treated like, as you say, everyone keeps saying the high school mentality. And, there are a lot of pranks and a lot of things going on that sort of make it seem more like high school, I guess, in professional wrestling. But that's one of them that I'd really, really struggle with. But as I say, I wouldn't play along. And I would let people know that I'm above this. I'm not wasting my time with this made-up hierarchy. And I wouldn't last 2 minutes. I understand. It's like the New Jack. The New Jack story, very famous. He was invited to WWE in, let's say, 2004 or something like
I
that.
was there. I was right in the ring there with him and Val. I was right there.
Who? What?
It was in Miami, I think.
I didn't
Yeah.
think he ever did the match.
No. This was during the day, not the actual match at the show.
Please tell it then. Please tell.
Well, New Jack, I mean, tell your version, and I'll just give you a little bit of, the personal thing that I saw with that.
Okay. I don't know if Dean Malenko or someone told him, whatever you do, don't talk to Vince McMahon. And the first thing that New Jack did was when Vince was walking past, he said, "Hey, Vince, I just want to say thank you so much for having me. I'll do my best for you. Da 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 da." And then his name was struck off the board and he was sent. He said, "You can stay around for the show. We'll pay you, but you're not going to be on today." And Jab was like, "I'm paid. I don't need to be here. I'll see you later." And that was it. That's all it took was someone told him not to speak to Vince McMahon. New Jack did what any normal person would do and thanked the boss.
He did the most political thing New Jack has ever done. The most courteous thing he's ever done is what anybody would say. I said that in Chicago, my first show with WWE in 99, I went right up to him, probably buried me. I didn't even know. I went up to him, shook his hand, and I said, and mind you this, Russo got me hired a week or two before, or whatever time frame. And when I came there, he had just went to WCW. So for all I know, I had heat just by association of being, hired by Vince Russo, or at least Vince Russo was like, I want this guy. So they hired me.
There was a couple of months crossover. I think you debuted in like August maybe, and he was gone in October.
I was signed in June, and my first show was like July.
So yeah, there's 2-3 months crossover, yeah.
So, but it's still close enough and still a fresh enough wound in Vince's mind that this happened. So with that being said, I went right up to him, shook his hand, and I was like, I want to thank you for the opportunity. And, I'm not going to let you down. I'm going to do my best. This has been where I wanted to be since I got in. I wanted to get in the business. And that probably buried me, for all I know. My New Jack story, I didn't know about that. I was in the ring. I used to get in the ring and work out with Val and other people and just try to keep myself in ring shape when I wasn't working all the house shows. And New Jack got in there and worked a little bit with Val. And I had put over because New Jack and I had worked out in Webster, Mass. back in ECW one time. I don't know why we did it. We had worked a show that they showed the fan cam footage of us as Public Enemy versus the Gangsters. Then we did a match with them at the arena. But we had done something in Webster, and New Jack was like arm dragging me and hip tossing me. And I was like, dude, you imagine if you bust this out on an ECW show, the fans will go insane if you out wrestle a heel. And he was like, it's, kind of cool. He goes, just once in a while, I want to show people I can still do it. Dude, he could throw a hell of an arm drag and a hip toss, and I'm not sure he could probably throw drop kicks and stuff. So when he was there, him and Val were doing a little bit of chain wrestling, and then something to where it didn't get awkward, but it was just like, I guess Val went over and talked to Dean or something, and I was talking to New Jack, and then maybe this has already happened, and Dean was telling Val, yeah, you guys, maybe he was supposed to work Val, and then Dean gave Val the heads up that you guys aren't working tonight. I would have loved to have, I would have loved to got New Jack in the ring doing the New Jack stuff, and out of nowhere, New Jack drop kicks me and I go backwards over the top. People would go friggin' nuts. But that's my story, that he was in the ring working out during the day, and I believe it was in Florida for sure. I don't know if it was Miami, Fort Lauderdale, or Tampa, but it was somewhere in Florida, because I remember that day I went to train at a gym that was run by two of the American Gladiators. And I was like, this is great. It was like the blonde girl that was really jacked. And I think the other one was Mike O'Hearn, maybe. I'm not sure. But I was like, this is awesome. I got to see them and work out at the gym. But that's why it was memorable, because I remember that started out the day. Then I was like, man, New Jack's going to be in WWE. That's crazy, And today he probably would be there, like showing up at NXT and stuff like that.
With that being said, because I had like a list of 20 things just for the locker room newbie thing, and we're still on the first one, but I can't leave the handshake story, with light, heavy, or incredibly weirdly light, the workers' handshake. What did you do? What were you expected to do? And what will people do to you back as far as the lightness or otherwise of a handshake?
I know Meanie still does this thing with the pinching of your, like, completely super light. I had both eras. I had the era of the very light handshake, and then towards the end of WWE, and then obviously in other places, somehow it just switched to real handshakes. I guess when you get to a certain point, people know you can work. You can shake hands for real and not give them the cue, brother, that we're gonna shoot out there. Because that used to be the thing. Your handshake would kind of tell how you're gonna handle things in the ring, I guess. It was kind of like an analogy of I'm a stiff worker, so here's the stiff handshake. Nah, you can shake my hand light, and then if you pop me, I know, okay, you're stiff in the ring. Val and I, Tommy and I, Val and I especially would, I think the first couple times, like, dude, why can't we just shake hands like normal people? And then we would just shake hands. And people would probably go, oh my God, they're going to kill each other out there, which we did. But, but then again, it's such a weird thing. That's got to go back, I guess, to the carnival days of cluing somebody in if you're in kind of like Carney, like, hey brother, I'm one of you or I'm not one of you. I don't know. It's kind of like saying kayfabe or hey, did anybody see my wife kayfabe? Like if a fan comes in or whatever, just crazy.
Okay, this is totally just me, but I really hate shaking people's hands. I'd rather do the fist bump. It's just because like you're shaking 100 people's hands. You must have been catching colds off each other like every week. If you, or is that just me thinking that?
No, I'm like I said about the the staph infections and all the other stuff. Wrestlers or even the blood testing. Wrestlers are so fortunate that I guess if you don't think about it, it may have happened or our immune system was, kind of rub some dirt on it type of attitude when you're a kid. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure people got sick, but you would think more so because of the time zone changes, the stale air in the planes, the air conditioning and heat not being centralized in the hotel room. Those, I think, are more dangerous for your health than just a handshake.
I
Of
was
course, you
like,
shake hands with Balls Mahoney every day, then you're taking your life into
yeah.
your hands.
I'm gonna ask a ton of different stuff from the first of two lists I've written that I wanted to ask you about. So, how to find a spot in the changing room, in the locker room. Is it, okay, we already sort of discussed that, but is it a misnomer that there is a locker room? And more often than not, there's just whatever bunch of rooms you can find and just hole up wherever you fit, basically.
Well, in WWE and I guess in AEW, even in WCW and TNA, they would have stuff labeled as men's locker room, women's locker room, production office. And then, of course, Vince's office and travel and production office, things like that. And then, of course, there was, the men's locker room and then the extras, locals, enhancement talent, security, whatever. They sometimes wouldn't have it, but towards the end, there would be an extra sign up on a locker room, or it would just be curtains in the hallway, kind of near catering or something, depending upon the arena. Then, of course, you have men's locker room, but then you would see Austin, Taker, Rocky, whoever dressing, and then you would kind of know. And then even in TNA, there were two trailers, and then there was a room and near the production office, and then you would have the clicks there that would happen. You just have to figure it out, and then usually somebody would clue you in and say, hey, you can come dress with us, or yeah, don't dress there, you're not over enough. Or you'd walk in and you'd look, and then you'd have the old veteran thing where they're all leaned over, but then they kind of look up at you. All they're missing is the cigarette and putting the cigarette out under their feet. And that look would tell you, you're not welcome here. And then people like Hogan and Savage and other people back in the day, or even Warrior, would have their own locker room. I don't know. That wasn't as prevalent like when I was there. People having individual locker rooms.
Any names you remember? Because I don't even think I'm pretty sure The Rock never had his own.
No, I saw Rocky in the locker room a few times. I think the dedicated or the locker room for this top guy or that top guy morphed or evolved in the tour buses. The tour buses were their locker room.
Asking advice from veterans. I don't think I've ever asked you this actually. Were you the type of person who would actively seek advice from guys in the main event or just will you watch my match, or what would you do in this situation? Were you one of those people who were not afraid to ask advice in that respect?
I was not afraid, but the mistake I made too, this is something for new wrestlers or something in the company, everybody's going to have a different perspective or a different twist or a different bit of advice for the same exact match, maybe the same exact spots. So if I go and ask Taker, can you watch my match? And then I go ask Steve Austin, can you watch my match? Then I ask them for feedback, and they both give me suggestions on what to do with that same spot, but two different suggestions. Do you know the trap I get into next week? I'm going to do one, but not the other.
You don't do either of them.
Or I get heat with both of them, I get heat with one of them. So what I suggest you do is you got to pick somebody, and usually somebody will be like, will offer the advice. And here's the thing. I always ask people to watch my match. Funny part was I would ask Vince to watch my match and he was in Gorilla. Because I know sometimes he'd be too busy. And sometimes he would call me over. And in this thing here, there's never a perfect match. For the people who listen on audio, it's a thumbs up from Vince. That's like, I don't have really time for that. But if he really liked something, he would get up or call you over and tell you. And if he didn't like something, you would hope he would tell you. Because if he would just bring the glasses down, you'd be like, well, I'm not seeing anybody next week. I know that now. But you have to pick. It's almost like picking a mentor. So you have to really be careful, because what happens is not only the fact that you want to pick a mentor that kind of like mirrors, like for me, it would have been maybe Shawn Michaels, just for the look and some of the moves, but it actually turned into people I traveled with. Glenn, Rosie, even Charles Robinson. Charles, when we're out there, if you see something that's going sideways, man, just give me an Iggy. Give me something. Or, Charles, did you see something with why did that spot get botched? You know, what happened? The referees they don't get enough credit because they're looking right there at what's going on from your perspective. So the referees will be maybe the first people you want to kind of ask, because then the referees also feel like you're empowering them and you respect their opinion. And they're going to do more for you in the ring and out of the ring. It's always good to it's kind of like the production people. You want to make friends with them too, because not only are they hardworking and they're really good guys most times, but because I made friends and asked those guys, hey, this is going to happen, can you catch this? That's the reason why I got like that purple lighting and got the cool, made me look like a star on Heat, because the production guys just did it one day. Because dude, we're gonna make him look like a star. You know, that's the good part. But getting back to the mentorship, you want to pick somebody that you can stick with and that will give you real advice, that will say to you, that sucked, that will say to you, hey, guess what? It was good, but I'm going to split hairs because I know you can be better. Don't get lazy. I know you can be better. Don't get content, you know, or pull you aside and go, what the F was that? That's what you need, that brutal honesty with that. But if you have more than one, that person could say it sucked. This person says it's great. The next week, you do what the person said it sucked. The other person goes, well, I watched it. Why didn't you do what I told you to do?
Were there any people in agents, veterans, maybe not main eventers, who would just offer unsolicited advice and for the most part was bad advice?
Well, you have very much different eras. During the time of agents, you have, when I came into the company, Blackjack Lanza, Tony Gurria, Terry Taylor, who else? Well, Pat. You know, I didn't have Arnold Skolin or Strongbow.
Was George Steele still there while you were there?
No, he wasn't. No, 98, 99, I think he was gone. Or at least he wasn't at the shows. He might have still went under like a $500 a week thing that Vince took care of a lot of legends. But what I would say is a lot of the advice, see, this is the problem too. A lot of the advice I got, I wasn't knowledgeable or experienced enough to see it for what it was. I was still in the, you're trying to handcuff me. You're trying to hold me back. I just want to do cool stuff. I still had that little bit of like ego that wanted to do some cool stuff. And I listened to them, but there were a lot of times where I went out there and still did other things to try. Now, I did it on house shows. If Terry Taylor, Blackjack Lanza, or Tony Gurria told me, during this TV match, we need you to do this, I'd fall in line. I wouldn't balk. The house shows were the time to experiment and, dare I say, get chewed out and get heat. So the agents, I got a good agent story. Tommy and I, this is the funny thing about you're talking about, like, basically the fixes end, even more so than just the match results. We used to, on house shows, be in the production office, and just by chance, Lanz's the agent report was on the desk. It's a Saturday. This was the agent report for Sunday. And the agent's report every single week would be, there were so many signs for Triple H, and he had the biggest pop of anyone on the show. Who's bringing signs to a house show? And there were no signs. He had the biggest pop and this and that. But guess what? More times than not, these agents left before Triple H's match, which was last, because we had to stay and watch and learn from the main eventers. And then for our match, it was they had a good little match, good for what it was. It was like a Meltzer review of my matches, good for what it was, which I would say, well, that means it was a good match, right? And that's just how it is. I mean, they were figured in. They had the reports. They knew how their bread was buttered, and they needed to kiss up to Triple H, and obviously Vince and everybody in the office did as well.
How long would you leave it until you're in the company? On average, would you be giving advice to someone now, let's say, because I'm sure it was different in 1999 when you were there, but how long should you leave it generally until you think you're senior enough to actually start asking for creative changes?
I think the environment fosters that you always are scared to ask for changes or to do things. Now, I had a very unique spot. Obviously, I put everybody over. I was in a spot where that was my position, but they didn't bother me a whole lot with how to do it. They knew that I would do good business and that I wouldn't go into business for myself. And if they wanted 90-10, 50-50, 70-30, if they wanted that within that. And they also knew if I was a babyface especially, and they needed to cut the time, I would cut out my shine completely because it doesn't mean a damn thing. So, and they knew when they put me in the spots where, dude, there was times on live TV where I would go out there, I would be in Gorilla, they would say, you're cut down to 2 minutes. I would, on the way to the ring, get in there first, they would say, you have 12 minutes now. Then when my opponent's coming down, they would switch it to 6. Then during the match, they switched to 8. Then during the comeback, they would cut it back down to 1 or 2. Or, you see what I mean? It would be, and I would just go home early because politically, what I would do, especially if it was on Raw, on Heat, it didn't matter. But on Raw, I would make sure, and this kind of, I guess, lended to maybe my longevity there politically, is I would make sure we would go home early and then go up to the people at main event of Raw and SmackDown or whatever it was and say, hey, guys, we went home a couple minutes early or 3 minutes early. You got 3 more minutes on your match. Or I would tell the agent, we did in front of the people, the main event, like, I'd be like, yeah, we went home early. We weren't sure, but we wanted to make sure the main event had enough time. Because who cares about my match? And that's just the truth.
I've got, do you know what? We can't do the unwritten WWE locker room rules. I'm already going to say that. We're going to have to skip that for Take a Shot, a future episode, but at least I've written all the answers down here. This is something I'm interested in. When will you find out what you are doing on a given day? So let's call it a TV taping. So you get there at 12. Is that call time?
Well, 1 p.m. on the East Coast, and then West Coast would be 11 or noon, or, depending upon the time zone. But 1 p.m. would be the latest that you would get there. And I would usually be under the mindset of NFL football teams. If you're on time, you're 15 minutes late. I would get there early. Plus the fact, my introvert nature, I would get there at noon, 12:15, get my catering, and even get the next meal, and then go hide.
With that being said, who would you have to check in with to let someone know that you're in there and you're not going to get fined for being late?
Well, usually the agents or Tim White, who used to hand out draws and stuff, they would have a table sort of in the parking garage area or the beginning of the hallway. You can't, that's why if you're late, they'll be there and they'll see you. You can't avoid passing that table. So that's why we get there early. And There used to be, like, I know at the end of WCW, they had like a fingerprint reader or something to make sure you checked in. We didn't have that, but
The biometrics.
the biometrics, yeah, they knew about CCTV in 1984 before England. So I did a little bit of there, a little bit of callback for you there.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, V for Vendetta, the whole deal. What was it? What was it? Something. Remember the November 5th? I can't even remember that. They would say it during V for Vendetta. Awesome movie.
You're going to hate me for this, but I tried to watch half of that and I checked out. I got bored. I'm very easy to get bored with films. I've got no patience.
What about the Stevie Richards show? How bored are you with that? 18 episodes in.
You must be joking, for God's sake. You must be joking. The most entertaining 2.5 damn hours of wrestling talk.
2.5 hours on a short day. How's that?
Yeah, tell me about it. I keep writing too much stuff. You know this.
That's
I mean,
good.
You reams of stuff.
My wife asked me yesterday, have you guys run out of topics yet? And I go, oh, just ask James that question. We got about 80.
Seen the list of topics I wrote. I wrote one like one day as well. When were you told what you were going to be doing that day? And because like you just said, well, I'd just go and hide somewhere for most of the day. Would someone have to come and find you? Would you have to report to somewhere to know what you were doing that day? When would you find out you were doing maybe a pre-tape promo or something like that? Give us a rough idea of times and who would come and get you and who would produce these backstage things.
Now, when I say hide, I mean more, there were times where I would take my Dreamcast or my Xbox up to a suite and play video games. But if you get there, like I get there at 12:30, I'd eat before anybody gets there. If they had a gym in the arena, usually I would make that my second workout. I would know, I would prepare enough to know, like in Cleveland, they had a gym. So I'd be able to be like, okay, in the morning, I'll do my cardio, then I'll do some weights in the afternoon and some stretching after I eat, something like that, or after 4. 1 o'clock is the call time, say on the East Coast. Production meetings are happening. Usually 4 p.m. is when the board starts to go up. Now that's changed over the years. They rip up the script right up till showtime from what I hear now, especially when Vince was there. But usually I would ask, I'd see Tim White, I'd see an agent. How you doing? How you doing, Tony? You have any idea what I'm doing today? I would initiate by asking, and sometimes because things would change. My favorite thing with Gurria, I would ask Tony Gurria a serious question but so many people used to kind of mess with Tony. Hey, and sometimes I would be sarcastic or cynical. And I would say, hey, Tony, what am I doing today? And he grabbed my arm. He goes, what are you, a smartass? I'm like, what? Or when we were calling a very basic finish on a house show, like a sunset flip, I would be like, okay, I do this, this, and this. They go, oh, here it comes, sunset flip. And Tony would grab my arm and go, smartass.
Tony Gurria is one of the agents. We'll talk about agents another time. Take a shot. I know. But Tony Gurria is one of those people, man, I hear the gamut of either my most loved or specifically I remember Shane Douglas saying, man, I hated that guy.
I wouldn't say that Shane would probably be more on than I would. I would let it roll off my back because Tony would just say, hey, I haven't won a match in months. I was like, you haven't booked me to win a match in months. You smartass. Walk away. That's all he called me. But, yeah, Tony, I mean, there's agents that have their favorites and there are agents that are just, they don't have a clue. Some of the best wrestlers make the worst coaches, and some of the worst wrestlers make the best coaches, just like in football or any other sport.
This is something I don't know if it's more prevalent now than it was back then in the mid-2000s, let's say, for example. But, we saw that photo of Drew McIntyre and CM Punk chatting ringside before a show, and there was tons of people around the ringside, people in the ring practicing. I don't know if it's as prevalent back in the mid-2000s, as I say, but what is the etiquette for going to the ring and trying to practice moves? Would you have to wait for other people to clear out? Would you have a set time, let's say?
Well, it all depends. They did have set times for tryouts where they would just basically have locals or extras or anybody come in that they wanted to take a look at. You want to talk about the worst thing ever. It's like going to wrestling. After you start wrestling, the worst feeling in the world is trying to get back in shape for wrestling or wrestling in front of no people, no crowd, no noise, and then having agents and writers around the ring just watching you with no emotion and not trying. when guys would do that, by the way, I would make Dreamer and I would make noise and clap and try to encourage them because we might be working with these guys one day. Like I would remember that. So I don't ever want to make anybody feel like off. It's hard enough, like I said before, without making it harder. But they would have rehearsals, say entrances. Vince would come out and rehearse certain segments. In between, I think, when those guys and girls were getting the ring for the tryouts, and if there was rehearsals after the production meeting, somewhere in between there, I'd work out with Val, I'd work out. Arn would be there helping guys and girls out. Fit would be there working with the girls. Usually between, I guess, 1 to 4. So when I say I was hiding, it was usually until I seen people in the ring. Then I would come down and show my face and work out. And really, I think no matter where you're at, you should work up a little bit of a sweat in the ring, house shows and TV and stuff like that, and keep yourself sharp. Because you're going to have off days, but getting in that ring even for 15 minutes and just kind of rolling around and working up a sweat kind of gets you in the rhythm and the groove for the match that night. It's really, and if you don't have a match that night, definitely get in the ring and work out because you're getting reps in. Like if I got into the ring right now, I would be just as rusty and my timing would be off as somebody who's 6 months into the business. And I got to re-get that along with the conditioning.
How about hanging around in gorilla position? What's the etiquette around that? Do you only hang about there when it's your match coming up? Can you be there watching monitors, for example? Let's say, when are you sort of welcoming? Are there any times are you not welcoming gorilla position?
Well, we have a monitor and chairs out there, usually where the interview, the big monitor with the box truss behind the interview and the interviewee, that would be where you would watch it. Also, there is monitors in the locker room or monitors. Now, if your match was coming up next, you'd be on deck in gorilla. But no, the gorilla's big now. I've seen when they walk through the gorilla position, it's huge. It wasn't that big before. And for people who don't know, the gorilla position is a tribute to Gorilla Monsoon. That's why we call it the gorilla position.
I sort of missed this out. I was going to leave it for next time, but I'm actually going to bring it up now. Is catering, because you said, you sneak into catering early, get your food, leave. But for the most part, is catering just like high school in the sense that, you're not allowed to sit certain places, you can't look at certain people? I don't get it. But what do you think about, or in your experiences, what were the rules of catering, the do's and do not do's?
Well, don't sit down with Vince while he's eating, because sometimes he would come into catering with Triple H or whoever at the time, his inner circle people, and sit down and eat. You'd say hello to him or whatever. Obviously, there's no handshaking if he's got food or whatever, but it's definitely a high school cafeteria with your cliques and who you sit with. See, that's why I went early and did that. I've had experiences. This is the funny part about wrestling too, that you have friends, but in wrestling, there's still politics that trump friendship, even true friendship. For example, Tommy Dreamer would sit with me at time to time, when I was in catering or doing whatever. And then when Edge and Christian would walk by, without even saying anything, he would get up, grab his food, and go sit with them. Gotta learn how to play the game. You say you gotta learn how to play the game, wacko.
I see. So it was for political reasons.
But he was friends with those guys. He traveled with them, but the second they showed up, he had Jericho, he would go sit with them. And I'll be like, wow, thank God at high school I was a nerd that didn't have a lot of friends because this would have shocked me at this point. But that's just the way it is. And that's why, you look at the people the people I stay in touch with now, and this can get to the dressing part, most of the guys I talk to today were locals and extras during my time at WWE that I got to know and become friends with.
What were the rules if you want to invite friends or family to shows?
I never had friends and family come to shows. I always separated that. It was work. I assume now it's a lot different. They even have daycare, I hear, for the babies. There was times where, if I was in Philly, they would ask me if I have any tickets for family or friends. Sometimes I would get them for my brother or my sister or my cousin. but I would never see them. I'd be just going to the next town because I didn't live in Philly. I either lived in Connecticut or Florida, and that was it. To me, it was like I couldn't wait to get home, wherever that was. And I'm sorry, but I would never do that because the whole thing too is I saw early on that on the indies, when people had their family and friends, they would use the, "Hey, too close to my hometown, brother. I can't do the job." Or "I got my wife out there, or my mom or my dad." And they never wanted to, it was, like I said, it's hard enough to kind of feel it out and battle to get your stuff in or battle to keep yourself over without introducing that stress of family and friends because you're too tempted, like, "Oh, my family's out there and I'm losing in 30 seconds." And you kind of, even back then, you didn't smarten your family completely up to what was going on. So they thought you were just a failure in this dream that you had. So, kayfabe back then, I didn't clue my family into, plus I came home with injuries all the time. So they were like, "Man, this stuff's real."
Did you know how to talk then? Or did you just sort of let them figure it out?
Well, when I started winning matches, they knew it was fake.
I see.
That's when they were clued in that, like, our son's not a tough guy. This has to be fake.
Now I've already asked about when do you show up, but you sort of hinted at it before, but when were you allowed to leave?
This was something where a lot of times, with house shows, especially when they put down that rule of stay till the end and learn off the main eventers, which these guys would do essentially a lot of times the same matches. Who could blame them? There'd be runs where you're getting down a match for TV or the pay-per-views, and they didn't have what they had now where people were always filming with phones and stuff to kind of give it away that they did the same stuff. That's essentially what the house shows were, James. The rehearsal for a WrestleMania match, a pay-per-view, a TV match, whatever it might be. So we had to stay till the end, but a lot of times we would try to get out of there. The agents sometimes didn't even stay till the end of the match. Lance and them used to leave for the next town. So that would be our cue, something. But they always had somebody, we'll get to the union thing, because there was always somebody stooging or somebody that would curry more favor by saying, "Hey, they left early," and they would kind of prop themselves up that way. On TV, and this is where, when we get into the action figure episode go ahead and say it, I'll take my drink.
Take a shot of Fanta.
Future episode. Future episode.
Future episode.
My action figure had a bag because Pete and everybody knew that Dreamer and I used to leave pay-per-views early. And Dreamer and I would wait till the pyro was going off to sneak out because it was so loud. We could slam that door open and closed and nobody would pay attention. So I always thought, like, it's a weird thing. You want to stay there and you want to do that. But then again, you know why people stayed till after the show? The country club ass kissing
I
after
was doing
the
the
show.
handshake. The gesture.
Yeah, it was great. What a great show, Vince. Oh man, you outdid. I didn't think last week you could outdo yourself, but you outdid yourself. And that's it. And that would culminate. The ultimate country club ass kissing session was the WrestleMania after party, which was ridiculous. But most guys got the opportunities for the whole year during that party.
I am just writing that down for a future episode. You know what I'm saying? After party, because that is definitely something we need to talk about at some point. I'm going to ask, right, so as you know, I sent you two large lists, one of them mostly pertaining only to WWE, the first one mostly locker room general. I'm going to ask you a few more from the second list, which is more locker room general, and then we will move on to wrestlers' courts. Taking phone calls in the locker room, what's the etiquette there?
It really all depends on who you are. I wouldn't answer any phone calls. I wouldn't even really communicating. Social media, like we talked about in the last episode, wasn't really a thing. So a lot of times, I mean, early on, it was video games, and then they banned the video games in the locker room. So that would be a good way to pass the time. But I would never really take phone calls. And even then, we didn't have iPhones or Blackberries were just really becoming consumer level. So you couldn't even, you needed to use that T9 thing. It would take you forever to send a text to somebody much less an email. So for me, it was kind of like, what was that? It was a communication blackout for the time I was on the road, and especially at the building.
You just said that, and that's something. Damn it, I forgot to mention the games being banned. Okay, so obviously you were a gamer. That's how you passed the time. Those interminable hours, especially on TV recording days. Why were the games banned, and what were they expecting you to do for hours on end after the games were banned?
Learn your craft. Learn your craft. Where I can understand, like I said, getting in the ring, making sure you're still in good ring shape, that your timing's good. Those things can happen. You don't want to spend 2 hours in the ring and then wrestle at night. You're already beat up. It was very weird because the locker room atmosphere was fun and guys kind of joking with each other, playing Madden, trash talk. And it was really like a football locker room in a way, where you're talking trash and nobody really took it too personally. Then somebody just said, maybe one person might have had a bad match or something. They're like, well, he was playing video games earlier and they banned the video games, learn your craft, stay till the end, all that stuff. And then it slowly came back, I guess. Not when I was there. When I got released in '08, it was still largely frowned upon. We didn't have the music room or the video game room like AEW. But that would have to me, it was like, you worked, and back then it wasn't getting paid to learn in the Performance Center. It wasn't an instant push in NXT. It wasn't you were on TV with less than 1 year in the total into the business. You know what I mean? When you got to WWF and WWE at the time, you were already in the business minimum 5, 8, 10, maybe 15 years. So you kind of if you didn't learn your craft by that point, what are you doing here? That was the confusion for me. And I had a lot to learn. I knew it, but my learning wasn't going to come from anything else but getting matches and reps and segments and promo, like live fire. I wasn't going to learn. I was going to learn a little bit by watching, but I could still play video games and then watch the monitor during the show. It was very confusing.
I'm going to ask you one more and then we'll sort of wrap this segment up. I'm not asking for anything specific. We'll probably get to more of that in a future episode. Take a shot, you know what I mean? But when we return to this, taking ribs.
Is there a brand, by the way, called Future Episode that we can get a sponsorship? That would be awesome.
I'll look into the trademark of that. We'll see if we can get it on T-shirts.
I think T-shirts of that.
When your wife said, "Have you run out of topics yet?" It's like we're tripping over topics to fit in. We can't do it. There's too many topics.
Welcome to the ADD version of Stevie Richards show.
Yeah, 18 episodes so far. They're all ADD.
They're all ADD.
Chris loves editing these episodes.
Bless him. Ribs. I'm not asking for who ribbed you or if you ribbed everyone else, but if someone you weren't particularly friends with who may have pulled a prank on you, in quotation marks, it might have been a prank, it might have been a bit more vicious than a prank. How do you take it? What are the do's and do not do's?
I'm not quite sure. Now, I want to preface this with, by the way, with all this stuff, that I've never, ever, no matter what locker room it is, and especially in WWE, ever felt comfortable, ever felt like I fit in, ever, and that could be just me, but I think the environment fosters that, don't get too comfortable, but in a lot of ways you don't get comfortable at all. So I think the comfort that you outwardly would feel like, oh, I belong, I've made it, whatever, can be misconstrued as arrogance. And that's where ribs can start, pranks can start. Or sometimes, if people rib you or mess with you or joke with you, that's because they're accepting you. If they're quiet and they never talk to you, that silent heat is more dangerous than somebody constantly messing with you. And I don't mean messing with you crapping your bag or cutting your suit pants or throwing your stuff in the shower. Those things can be kind of mean. The lock, padlocking your bag on the pipes on the ceiling. I'm talking about if you botch something and they mess with you for a month, or if you mess up a promo and they mess with you for a month about that, or they put it in the show as a rib, those things are fine because it's a natural part of the testosterone-based, childlike, childlike professional wrestling environment, high school. They're going to mess with you. And also, if you sell it, they're going to mess with you even more. That's the key. Now, if you no sell it to the point, like you said, I'm above this. Now it kind of morphs into real heat that you can't take a joke. Dude, it's such a tap dance. The literally, like there's metaphoric eggshells everywhere for you to walk on. And the thing is too, that like it taught me too to not take myself, I overthink, but not take myself so seriously when I started to truly show vulnerability and put myself in positions on TV. People didn't really mess with me because they're like, he kind of already makes a fool of himself on TV. So what can we really do?
Not particularly specific to WWE, but are there any other mistakes to mention now that newbies in a locker room might do that this is the perfect time to sort of ward themselves off of doing it? Things like, I guess, talking too much, or I don't know. You tell me. What do you think?
Bobby Eaton said it best to me very, very long time ago. Don't talk, can't get heat. If you don't open your mouth, you can't get out. Now, it means if someone asks you a question, don't not answer it. A lot of times I think that locals or extras, it usually happens sitting at the monitor watching a match. Say like two locals are on the show, two separate matches, dark match, heat match, whatever it might be. And they're friends, and they're going to get honest feedback from their friend from the indies. The one has the match, comes back, sits next to him, and you have like a Randy Orton, John Cena, whoever else sitting right there as well. Watching matches, but also Booker T would be another one, but he would do his commentary, and that's how he got his commentary job during dark and heat matches. If they come back, and I would pull locals aside afterwards, or even beforehand, if I really knew them and knew they were good dudes, they would sit down next to each other and go, hey man, what did you think? The guy would give the other guy advice. That would be a no-no. Because now you think you're better off than him. You think you're on our level. You can see how that can get misconstrued purposely so somebody can have somebody to mess with. I would usually pull them aside, and I would get heat for this. Why are you smartening these guys up? Because I know the terrible feeling of not being smartened up. Now, if these dudes still continue to be idiots and not listen to the advice, that's on them. You get that one. But I would pull them aside and say, whatever you guys do, I know you're trying to lift each other up, help each other out. Save it for the car ride. Do not even do it anywhere in this building. Do it on the car ride. Because if you do it, they're going to think, oh, you think you're better than everybody else, huh? Don't do it. Sometimes they would listen. Sometimes they wouldn't. And then they would end up listening because they would get it. And they wouldn't be asked back either. That would be the worst part of it.
So we've got a bit of time left before we get to Wrestler's Court, and then what went wrong is we're keeping it a weekly segment at the moment. I know it's one of our most popular, or your most popular, I should say. Now, there are a couple of things that I wrote down, but I'm sure you'll come up with some more as well, of things to discuss in WWE if you want to be fired. So what are some of the taboo subjects that you just never, ever brought up? I mean, you mentioned one previously before, saying don't give advice to someone else of your level, I guess, when there are veterans in the room, you know, random things like that. But what else could you not talk about in the locker room that would get you heat, if not fired outright?
Well, the number one thing would be what I talked about before, and that's bringing up unions and wanting to start a union or trying to talk to the boys about a union. Definitely. And that happened famously right before and at WrestleMania 2. And Hulk Hogan ratted out Jesse Ventura on that. The other one I would say would be Piper got fired right after the Bob Costas interview. So if you do an interview where you speak out of turn about the company in any way, in other words, these writers that we talked about with the, the Rolling Stone article, they're still not giving their names because they don't want to get heat in the company that they no longer work for. It's very strange.
Did you hear? Were there any rumblings of union when you were with the WWE? I mean, you were there for like nearly 10 years. Did anyone beyond a bit of complaining ever try and get something started up, band some support together?
No, never, never even an inkling of that. Now, people had talked like after it got released, there was more rumblings from former wrestlers. We see it come up every so often about either when the WWE network started, people were talking about royalties because it was their way of getting around the DVD royalties and other kinds of content royalties. Then, of course, the concussion lawsuit, all these different things pop up every few years. Now, I guess, well, what's going on with Vince, there could be male wrestlers that could pop up with the side of what the females experienced. I don't know. I don't know any of that. But yeah, the union stuff never came up, not one time from 99 to '08. And maybe that's because guaranteed contracts, other things are happening. It was no longer, I mean, I was there during, the end of the Rock, Taker, Austin type thing. Then it was John Cena. And then you started to see that there was no one star that was truly like way that far above everybody else, which you would think at that point, union talk should come about because they don't have that one person like a Hogan that's going to end up stooging off Jesse Ventura. But it never came up. Never. I think there's always going to be at least one person, if not more, that are going to be taken care of to a degree that they're going to quell or stooge off any kind of union talk.
What about discussing contracts and money and stuff? I know that was always frowned upon. I believe the Click started talking and comparing notes, which did actually sort of help them. But I understand also that Vince and the WWF don't want people discussing their payoffs because then comparisons lead to complaints and then money has to be, people end up getting compensated for what they feel was getting underpaid. And I know what you've said in previous shows is they'll get their money back one way or another. But money-wise, what could you and could you not talk about?
Well, it was fostered by the company, by the office. It wasn't the boys saying, don't discuss money and don't do this and that. They just don't want the inmates to talk about what they're getting paid to be in the asylum. So I never really talked about money, but your place on the card and your push, and the merchandise, all that stuff kind of proved via those actions if you were figured in or not. That's kind of the way it was looked at. And everybody wants to get paid more. Everybody wants to be, I don't care what anybody says with their famous promos about these part-timers. People want to work as little as possible and get the most amount of money. That's what everybody should strive for at least. But we never talked about money. Now, Crash and I would talk about money because there was a story like that I've told before that at WrestleMania 19, when I went out there with Victoria and we spent the entire week working the match out, fitting myself with Victoria, Jazz, and Trish Stratus and doing all the stuff we needed to do to make the match come off very well. And the girls did a great job. Crash got more for sitting and catering than I did working WrestleMania. So WrestleMania 17, people that sat in catering got paid more than I did. People I knew, but we talked amongst ourselves in the car about these payoffs. Now, could I go to JR and complain about my payoff? There was one time I said something to him and he was like, you're just a manager. Okay, fair enough. I get that. That's why I guess you feel like I'm not worth as much as the other guys and the right to censor. Now, when you start to do that, you do foster a lot of negative feelings, a lot of jealousy, a lot of envy, the cutthroat and the backstabbing nature, if you're kind of prone to that kind of behavior, is going to get even worse. But that's what Vince wants too. Ruthless aggression. I kind of couldn't tell you. It's 1984 double speak, double think type of stuff to keep you confused, to keep you divided, to where you never get together and go, dude, if we all work together, we could all make a lot more money. They don't want that. And it will never happen. It will never happen.
There was rumblings of a union later on, quite a few years after you left, and I believe that was spearheaded by Ryback. He didn't get it off the ground, obviously. I don't know how many people agreed with him to the point that they, would voice their concerns. Was it stick their head above the parapet, as it were? But I believe that's the last time anyone has ever voiced their opinion about a union. Was Ryback quite a few years ago now, and I suspect that's one of the reasons why he'll never be welcome back in WWE. But is that really the only topic where if you actually brought it up and you just be gotten rid of straight away, or are there other things as well?
Well, I don't think nobody's going to grab you and say, you're out of here. That's far too confrontational. They're going to wait till you go home because, God forbid, you deal with the wrong personality and you get fired right there. They can be going out with a blaze of glory. So they wait till Tuesday or Wednesday to have Johnny, or in the case of later on, Mark Carrano, call you and tell you we don't need you anymore. But you're going to get enough clues before you even leave that building. If you have any sort of self-awareness, you're going to know when people don't look you in the eye, when people look down, when people don't say goodbye to you or hello to you or have a conversation. The word has been brought down by the mafia bosses that you're gone. And now you're persona non grata.
So are there any more topics beyond union that would see you treated that way?
Well, like I said, if you're doing an interview like Piper did with Bob Costas and you kind of talk about the pitfalls and the ugliness of WWE and professional wrestling, you're not coming back. That's the way it is. You can do anything. There was a time, like, if you even did anything outside of wrestling, they would frown upon it and they would punish you, or you just wouldn't get booked. I don't know what's worse, getting released, getting your 90 days and going to TNA or somewhere else, or you just sit at home for the rest of your contract and they never tell you. I would opt on just rip the Band-Aid off and get me out of here.
Not to make you laugh, I'll just briefly mention this. Did WWE have a HR department when you were there?
I mean, even if they do today, I think it's just for appearances or to keep the SEC happy or something. Because, you can't go tell anybody anything. You just can't. I mean, it's you suffer in silence, or you suffer in the car ride where you can bitch and moan about it there. I don't know. It works the exact. I mean, corporations work that way. Wrestling actually is ahead of the curve with the way corporate culture and all these other places have kind of de-evolved over the years with workers' rights. I mean, wrestling was they had their finger on the pulse of the way it was going.
Well, at least you're an independent contractor and have absolutely no, pension or.
Oh, but then when you look at when they were doing that was another lawsuit, independent contractor versus employee. And Raven had famously said like 16 or 17 elements that prove you're an employee, but no, you're still an independent contractor.
Well, as we record this today, Kung Lee lawsuit versus UFC, I found particularly interesting. I don't think many people within wrestling did, but there's a huge correlation between monopolies or monopsonies and fighters' rights and, being undercut. And are we employees? Are we self-employed? If we're self-employed, why can't we go fight for another company? Why do UFC control all our bookings? And if UFC were found guilty, if that went to court, then WWE would have been absolutely next on the chopping block. Having said that, we are going to move on, and we're going to talk about something else that happened very specifically in WWE and its wrestlers' courts. Now, for people who don't know what wrestlers' court is, I'll ask you to explain the WWF WWE version. But in the old days, wrestlers' court was invented by Dutch Mantel. So it whiled away the lonely hours where he would just make up spurious charges against The Undertaker or me, Mark Callis, or whatever he was calling himself at that point. Just charging with, romancing the rats or something like that. Just whatever would just make Dutch laugh and take a laugh. And there was no seriousness to it. Dutch was just a fan of, these reality-based courtroom shows, and he brought that to wrestling. Then some years later, Wrestlers Court goes to the WWF. Maybe it was The Undertaker. I suspect maybe it was The Undertaker who took that concept and brought it into sort of almost a kangaroo court kind of thing, as it were, to charge wrestlers for infractions, some serious, some not serious. Sometimes it'd be fun, sometimes it wouldn't. But a little more information, if you would, on how Wrestlers Court was set up.
Well, I'm not quite sure. I've never went to a wrestler's court. I've never been part of it. I was never a defendant or a plaintiff in that. But there was rumblings. People knew when it happened. It was usually done maybe in a production meeting or where the talent meetings happened, in between or after that, between 4 o'clock and then the actual show. I don't know. I don't know about any serious wrestlers' courts. I think urban legend is Miz was in wrestler's court during that time when he wasn't dressing with the boys and all that stuff. I think maybe Don Callis was on his way to that. The fun version was based on the only part I knew, which I witnessed Edge and Christian giving Brian Gewirtz comic books and action figures and thanking him for the opportunity and everything he's done for them. They had a wrestler's court that was, I guess, a lot more jovial and fun and tongue-in-cheek with that. You buy The Undertaker like Jack Daniels, you buy a case of beer for whoever else or whatever it might be. And that's the only wrestler's court that I, when I was there, heard about and witnessed the lead up to it.
Why didn't you go to any of them then? Because, I mean, during your time there were loads that I've written down here.
I have no idea.
Would overlap with your thing.
I have no idea.
Just you just hiding out playing games in the...
Yeah, I wasn't avoiding it. I just might have missed it, which would have put me in wrestler's court for missing wrestler's court. Is that Inception or what?
I'm going to give you some examples. Teddy Long. Charged for selling boner pills, Edge and Christian, that I wrote down, getting too friendly with Brian Gewirtz. And then there's some semi-serious ones. Ivory for losing a dodgeball game to the Diva Search contestants at SummerSlam 2004. JTG sleeping with the wrong groupie. Apparently it was someone else's favorite groupie, and he made the wrong. Jeff Hardy taking Kane's first class seats without realizing. Goldberg actually took Chris Jericho to court after their little scuffle that Goldberg lost. He initiated it, and then Jericho stood up for himself, and then Goldberg lost it, and then he took Jericho to court where he lost again. So I don't know what he was thinking about there. And then we've got some harsher ones. Matt Stryker was annoying and told to get presents for Bradshaw and Undertaker. He refused. And then when Bradshaw challenged him to a fight, he accepted, causing JBL to back down. Another serious one was Melina reportedly rubbing some people the wrong way in the women's locker room. And I don't know if it was Kendrick and Paul London had a bet to see how long it would take for Melina to cry. It took her about 10 minutes. So basically, they just got up there to humiliate her. And then one of the most famous ones, maybe the most harsh one, Muhammad Hassan, no-sold Sergeant Slaughter's offensive moves, even though he was told to. But the big one was getting into Eddie Guerrero's face about using the camel clutch, which was Muhammad Hassan's finisher. But Eddie Guerrero used it as a transition move or just somewhere in the middle of the match. And Eddie's defense, not that he needed a defense, I guess, said, well, my father, Gory Guerrero, invented it. So I get to use that move whenever I want. Muhammad Hassan was told to pay a $4,000 bar tab. And apparently when he was told to bribe the judge, Undertaker, with Jack Daniels, Undertaker just poured it on the floor. So it runs the gamut from serious to real hazing there.
Man, I love Eddie Guerrero, but Eddie has a temper if you cross him the wrong way or say, and that definitely would have done it. Yeah, those are some definitely, I mean, that's a good kind of escalation into the most, the least serious into the most serious. I heard something about the Matt Stryker thing, not the JBL thing about the fight. The Muhammad Hassan thing, I can guess that could happen because that was something where they thought too much too soon. And of course, he got taken off TV after the Undertaker thing during the sensitive. It was during actually the subway attack in England. That's why they pulled it off SmackDown, right?
Yes. Yeah. That
right around the time that Hassan was on TV. And then they did the Undertaker thing where they had the guys with the hoods come out and they carried Taker away. And then UPN at the time was like, no way.
Yeah. I don't think, weirdly, I don't think our country would have been as sensitive to that as the States were, and I ended up getting
And it
struck.
happened
Did
in
it
your
ever
country.
broadcast that?
And it happened in your country.
No, I know. I just don't feel that there would have been that much of a correlation. Maybe there would have been. I don't know, but I don't. I think America might have been even more sensitive than us to that portrayal, I guess.
Well, probably because 9/11, war on terror, all that stuff, and they didn't want anything
Yeah.
kind of. But the character was on TV for months before that, so you knew it was coming, one way or the other.
Having said that, so we obviously know that there were people in WWE who had, in the parlance, heat in the locker room, and sometimes it got so bad that people were thrown out of the locker rooms, banned from dressing with the boys, quote unquote. I gave you a short list of people I suspected. Any people you remember being banned from locker rooms, and for what reasons?
I don't remember exactly too many people. I know stories. I don't know, our paths crossed, but I don't know if the actual timing was when I was there or if I was off the road or just got released. But Palmer Cannon had been really, really, they came down on him pretty hard. As a matter of fact, I think Nova told me the story that they were overseas and he just went home. And I was like Rey Mysterio was trying to tell him, no, please don't go. And he just went home and he was done.
Yeah. All I remember from him is he brought the minis to SmackDown for a very brief run in like 2005, I guess. But he was a very short-lived character.
Very short-lived. So
yeah.
Other than that, I don't know. They had guys who came up who had, I don't know anybody got thrown out of the locker room. Like I said before, the locals and the extras and stuff already knew not to go in there. There was some people that came in and got thrown out of the locker room. I think a local, I think it was Sean Spears, as a matter of fact, had mistakenly thought that like there's Red Bulls in like a cooler. He drank one of the Red Bulls, but it was Booker T's Red Bull. So I don't know. And he was told to leave the locker room that day, but I don't know if that was a permanent thing.
I've got a few names for you. So one of the most famous examples is The Miz. I believe he was eating chicken over Chris Benoit's gear bag. And somehow that manifested into The Miz being banned from the locker room for 6 months. And he had to dress in like public bathrooms and stuff in the arenas.
Yeah, I do remember that story. I don't know if I was there. Yeah, I was there at that time because when the Benoit thing happened, I was still with the company, but I probably wasn't on the road. And look at Miz now. He's a perennial WWE guy. He could stay there as long as he wants to, so he got the last laugh. I know when he was a heel and when he was champion, he would sprinkle in that real world or real experience in the locker room and cut excellent promos, very edgy promos, while JBL was on commentary because he was one of the main ones that gave him a hard time.
Another one, Matt Striker. So, I mean, you were on the WWE version of ECW with Matt Striker, and he said himself, I think I mentioned it briefly in the Wrestler's Court segment, is that he self-admittedly makes a bad impression first time. He gets nervous, he talks too much, and then people can take that any number of ways they wish. Or, as you alluded to beforehand, if people are just ready to be offended or looking for a reason to get to you, man, did Matt Striker give him one. So he apparently once told, talking smack about the Raw brand, I'm reading this off Give Me Sport, and Chris Benoit overheard him say that SmackDown's roster was better, which saw Matt Striker get thrown out of the locker room and the Miz treatment and having to dress in arena bathrooms for a while.
Yeah, the thing with Matt was, and I used to tell him this right to his face. I was a big fan. I mentioned the movie earlier, Shawshank Redemption. He's walking through the prison yard. Everybody's scowling at him, and he's walking like Andy Dufresne, not a care in the world. And I was envious because they're mad because you're not, like you just said, he probably thought, well, I was a teacher. I'm an adult. I'm a man. I played this game in high school. I'm not going to play it now. Maybe he came across a little bit more like, and once you say, like, if you talk to somebody in wrestling, and I've done this before, you go up to him one-on-one, confront him like a man, not confrontational, but say, hey, man, Like, what's the problem? What can I do? Like, what's the issue with me? Like, why do you have such a, oh, nothing, brother. Don't worry about it. No, everything's good. And then they go back treating you like crap. That's probably what Matt had done too. Like, pull aside somebody, maybe Benoit, and said, hey, man, like, what's the issue? Can we squash this? Oh, no, there's no issue at all. And then they go to treating them even worse. That kind of sums up pro wrestling.
Another one during your time was the Hardy Boys. Let me just read this. Sent out the door after risking the ire of both the APA and Kane after winning the tag titles from the Acolyte Protection Agency. The Hardy Boys were traveling to the next show. Unbeknownst to both of them, they unfortunately sat in first-class seats that were meant for Kane. And that saw them banned from the locker room for a short while. I also know that Perry Saturn had an issue with Matt Hardy when they were both wrestling in the early 2000s, I think at that point as well.
I've heard a little bit about that. I don't know about the first class seat in that story, but in general, you want to make, if you ever get a first class seat, you're giving that up. You're giving that up. And the thing is too, if you go to give the seat up and the boys refuse, the guys refuse, the top guys, it kind of gives you the clue that you have some sort of heat or some sort. Now they want, like you said, they want to be offended. They want to do that. And there's times, there was one time I got one and I was like, I'm getting on a different flight. I'm not getting on that seat no matter what. And guess what ended up happening? They were even madder at me.
Of course.
Because you have to take it. It's so effing stupid sometimes. It's exhausting. And I'll repeat it for the fourth time. This stuff is already hard enough as it is without somebody voluntarily trying to make it harder.
I'm going to give you a couple more names. Melina was one I mentioned before. They basically got her to wrestle's court to make her cry, but also I think she was ousted from the women's locker room at one point as well. I don't know, because obviously she famously went out with Johnny Nitro, John Morrison, that kind of thing. I don't know if that was an issue.
And there was a whole thing with Batista, and all that stuff and everything. Crazy stuff. I don't know all the ins and outs of that. All I do know is it was Baltimore, Maryland. They had 2 sets of stairs, and they have a stage with the curtain and everything. I believe it was a Sunday afternoon house show. It might have been a TV. I'm sorry. It might have been a Raw or SmackDown. I walked up the steps from catering or from one of the locker rooms. I had my food going to hide. Baltimore, it's really tough to hide. And I came up and Shelly was putting her finger in Batista's chest, MFing him about Melina, about this. And Dave was just smiling. And I was like standing there going, I get along with both of them. So I'm like, do I just step in? And she was MFing him and about Melina and all this stuff and Morrison. And I think he was smirking because he was like, you're gone after this. That's kind of the energy I felt. And I was just like, I even went up to her and I was like, hey, is everything all right? And she was crying afterwards. She was not bawling, but I think she was so emotional that she was there. And then I went up there and I crossed paths with Dave and I was like, dude, what was that? Is everything all right? He's like, yeah, it's fine. Which led me to believe like she's buried or she's gone and that was it. Is that kind of the story, that the way it was kind of portrayed through the sheets and stuff?
Yeah. I interviewed Shelley and she said basically the exact same thing, and she was gone very, very soon afterwards. She also once did that to Shawn Michaels. So I think Shelley's very much self-admitted. Occasionally she might have got in her own way there, politically speaking, with some of the biggest names. You mentioned Don Callis very briefly. I know that you and Don didn't cross paths, at least, hired by the same company. He was in ECW after you left. He left WWF before you joined, but I don't know the story with Don.
Well, he was just a different dude. He didn't fit in. He didn't fit into the scope of what they think. He wasn't one. Like I said before, everybody's unique and everybody's a weirdo and everybody's a freak in wrestling. Everybody is so flawed in their own way, but they want you to all be the same in some ways. Don, I don't think was, and Don, the urban legend with that is he would have to dress in his own car or rental or something. He couldn't even dress in the building. much less
Do
in the
they
locker
just
room.
distrust intelligence? Because Don's a very clever man. He's well educated. I'm sure he, like how I described, or maybe Matt Stryker described, or you described him as, man, I'm just too old and just not stupid enough to be broken down like this. I'm not playing the game. I suspect maybe that's Don's issue, was that he was too headstrong and just thought this was stupid to have to be treated like
Well, I have to
this.
give Don credit. He seemed like he would never get back into the business with any prominent role, but he's carved out a niche for himself in two different companies, in Impact and now in AEW. So really crazy how it all, if you stick with it long, I guess that's the part about wrestling too, that nobody ever lets go. That's why you have writers that won't give their names to Rolling Stone, because you just never know when you'll have that Tony Khan that's going to pay you 6 or 7 figures to do your thing.
Mm-hmm. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Don Callis was the best thing of the Attitude Era that just got absolutely no appreciation. He was fantastic at what he did. Same with Scorpio. I sort of put those two as like the least appreciated people of that era in the WWF, when they should have received a lot more.
I'll give you a little Easter egg that Right to Censor, Stephen Richards and Dr. Stevie both had borrowed liberally from what Don Callis, the Jackal character, was.
Really?
Yep. I just don't want him to try to get some money from me for saying that, but yeah.
Specifically what?
Well, the cult leader mentality. I mean, I took some stuff. I studied Charles Manson, Ted Bundy, other people, especially for the Dr. Stevie character.
Some people were also saying falling down with Michael Douglas that I never mentioned at the time.
Well, the outfit said that, the outfit, the short sleeves, the black tie and the pants was totally falling down, but I don't think it was meant to be that. Vince didn't get the Blonde Bitch project, which was the Blair Witch project when it first came, but he didn't get Scarface. He didn't get anything. As a matter of fact, Russo told the story that Russo had the WWF magazine ready to go right after the Austin 316 promo at King of the Ring. And Vince balked at it because I don't get the Austin 316. And Russo was like, it's going to be huge. That night on Raw, what did you see? All Austin 316 signs. But Vince ixnayed the cover having Austin 316 on it.
Okay, so we've got one more name to add to the list, but instead of just adding to the list of people thrown out the locker room, and why we're actually going to do 2 separate segments on them, we're going to go a bit of a deep dive of why. But first, we're going to do what went wrong. And this relates to an episode of WWE Raw from 2009, where Mr. Kennedy, Ken Kennedy, has just returned to the company after a layoff of about 8 months, 9 months, something like that. And he is part of a 10-man tag team, and he's going against Randy Orton. So, Stevie, over to you. One move. If anything went wrong, what went wrong?
This is I watched this about 10 times. I talked about it earlier in this episode. I watched it about 10 times, and it's just such an odd bump by Randy Orton. I'm trying to see, because it's a belly-to-back bump. Standard belly-to-back. Headlock by Randy Orton as he comes up right here. So as he comes up, he's got his headlock. He's in position. Now you can see right here, the hand right here is exactly where it should be. Then what Ken does is bring this hand and kind of cup the hamstring, the left hamstring of Randy Orton. There's the set, the jump right here. Everything looks good. I don't know. Now, what I would have said maybe is Randy let go of the headlock, which is fine because he's still exactly where he needs to be. Look, I'm going to right here. Hand right there, hand cupping the hamstring. Everything looks good. Ken straight up like this. Randy is going to elevate up here and then come back supposedly straight down. So basically, this is kind of like Dean Malenko would do a great belly-to-back suplex. He'd pick you up and almost drop you flat next to him instead of, say, a Saito's suplex or Dr. Death Steve Williams just do it, or other people where the bear hug and then kind of drop you high on your neck and shoulders. Now, that's the way I would throw a belly to back. I would like to grip with the waist lock and then kind of do it like that without the turn. The reason why I mentioned that, James and everybody, is because Randy's body, instead of, let's go to this part right here. So usually, even with a regular belly to back, the body is going to go that way because Ken is landing in this kind of 25, 30 degree angle for his back bump. But Randy goes the opposite way. You see what I mean? It doesn't make any sense because, look, you have this arm cupping right here, this arm cupping here, which is guiding and keeping the body pretty straight up. So essentially, Randy should have landed straight down or in that direction, not this direction. So very, very confusing. And as he lands, it looks like a fairly simple bump with a little bit of a roll on his left shoulder. That could be the one where it's like, ow, because Randy's had, I think, some shoulder issues as well. So he might have felt like a shoulder stinger or something. But his reaction here is F you and kind of a little swipe. Cena's got a look on his face, kind of like, oh, I don't know. See? Like, oh, right there. I didn't know you could zoom in. But as we're looking at Randy, I'm going to zoom in further here because we have a zoom in. Like I said, the hand position of Ken is perfect. Right there and right there. The problem is, now Randy's exactly where he should be. Either he's going to land high on his shoulders or they're both going to fall back. Because usually the angle of the person giving the belly to back, the bump that the person taking it matches the trajectory of that. So I don't understand. Like, you see what I mean? There's no way Randy should have landed. I don't understand why Randy landed perpendicular almost, or it's like they're making a V when they land. You know what I mean? So it's a very confusing bump. And I don't think Randy, like, basically already 99.9% was saying after this match, in his mind, he's saying, this jerk we're getting rid of him. Because I think Cena had an issue with Ken too. So, but right here, they're watching that in Gorilla saying, you know what I mean? Looking at each other, maybe shaking their head or tilting their head or just like, oh, and he's done. But even then, Randy's selling it, but Randy's selling it like he gave the move. So you can tell something went wrong. Like even if you're a casual fan, you're like, okay, this is a double down spot, but Randy's still above Ken and not really selling to any point right here. And I'm assuming that because Cena's on the team, that these are the baby faces and Orton is on the heel team.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of backwards. So when people was asking me, or you're asking me before the show, and even now, what went wrong, I'd have to guess political heat went wrong, not so much the move. What would you say?
Well, do you know,
What say you? What say you?
What say I? Can you use the zoom again? Because I wanted to see Randy Orton's head if it touches the mat, because I believe there was a portion of a quote that I'm going to read to you later where basically saying that, his neck got jacked up with the move. But from what I can tell when zooming in, I know we're only dealing with 24 frames or whatever it is per second.
His head never
doesn't look like
touched.
it touches.
He's never touched. What I would say is Randy has, at least he had a couple dislocated shoulders. I remember when he came back and his arm was in the sling the one time. He's got some shoulder issues. There could be upper spinal. He had back surgery not that long ago. So he could have been carrying around. But just the roll of the bump, I can't see. His head doesn't hit at all. Look, right there. His head doesn't hit. Now you can still have the ring bite you a little bit, but there's still space right there. So I couldn't tell you. I could not tell you as we zoom right into here. Look at it. That's the impact right there, and then roll over.
I've got a really out there theory. Because John Cena was on the other side, do you think Randy himself got a bit confused and was that, when John Cena used to, from the belly to back position, but then spin them around into a powerbomb slam kind of thing?
Like a Blue Thunder bomb before the 5-knuckle shuffle.
Exactly. It sort of looks like Randy Orton's trying to take that somehow, which is why when they land, they're almost at like a right angle in between them. It's very, very weird. And the more you slow it down, the more obvious it is that
Randy was turning his body to take that bump, you think?
Yeah. Who knows? I mean, everyone can have a brain fart, I guess. But, I mean, silly. I mean, did he overjump? His legs seem really high. So when he's at the peak, being lifted up, Randy Orton's legs do seem really, really high.
Yeah,
so
but that's
do you
an
think
illusion.
Kennedy might have lost him?
The legs being high is an illusion. We have it right here frozen. So if Chris brings that up in the split screen, I always kick my feet completely up, but also bring my head up to where I'm not going to hit, or even sometimes with belly to backs, I would purposely fold my legs over after taking the bump, or you take the bump and then flip yourself. You could be on to something, but in this position that we're looking at, the height, when Cena does that, it's almost like the Road Dogg Slam or the Rhea Ripley. You're in front and he drops. So Randy being that high, he has to know I'm getting belly to backed, because he still landed high on his shoulders, his back and his shoulders. I don't see his head hit. I think there was probably, my guess, only Ken knows, only Randy knows, and I assume everybody in this match has a clue as well, that they were 99.9% already convinced that Ken was out, that he was done. And also, he had been injured so much, his tricep got torn right after he cashed in the money, or right after he won the Money in the Bank and was supposed to cash it in on Taker, right? I think it was Taker. So the company had already lost faith in him as being a consistent, durable performer. And then I guess, maybe like I said, too much too soon. The Muhammad Hassan, you're already convinced that we're going to figure out how this guy's we're going to get rid of him. Now, in this case, nobody might be innocent. Maybe Ken also, like you said, didn't want to play the politics. I know Ken personally to an extent. I've worked Ken on the indies. He wasn't dangerous. If anybody's going to get hurt by Ken Kennedy, it's me. It's me. Steve V, as TDP would say. So if anybody's going to get hurt, it's going to be me. And he was completely safe with me in the ring. I don't know.
So I'm going to give you some quotes relating to this. On the topic of the botch move that led to his being fired, Mr. Kennedy said, Randy jumped really, really hard. In wrestling, it's give and take. It's a matter of either I drop him on his head or I help him through this. His neck never even touched the mat, which makes me wonder why he even went to the trainer's room to get his neck taped up. He was so injured that he went on to wrestle 3 nights in Mexico. Orton's response, Mr. Kennedy is in denial. He thinks you have to be able to do a moonsault to know how to work. As far as dropping me on my head, he did. He never got to see all 4 camera angles of him doing it. I did, plus the left side of my neck down to my trap was sore all week in Mexico. I did tell Ken that he shouldn't be dropping me on my head with such a simple basic move. He never said sorry and even called me a liar after the match. I remember looking at him in disbelief, and yes, I did tell management I did not want to work with him after that. Who wouldn't? That's my side. I think there's one more thing. My reaction to his big return was watered down, and I found it very funny reading in Kennedy's interview that he felt like I had an agenda, or almost like I wanted him gone. Not until I was given a belly-to-back suplex onto the back of my neck did I have any negative feelings towards Mr. Kennedy. And there's one more thing I need to add. Earlier in the day, Ken had just turned back up for the first time in months. Apparently, he snuck up behind Randy and gave him a bear hug and lifted him off the mat. And Randy didn't, because they were friends, they were traveling buddies and that kind of thing. And Ken thought they were obviously more tight than Randy thought at that point, because Randy turned around and was quite cool to him and wasn't very impressed that he'd been lifted off the ground, I guess. So that was going into the match from earlier in the day as well. So I've got more on Ken in a minute, but is Randy just manufacturing reasons to hate Ken here, or miscommunication, or everything above?
It's kind of tough, man. This is the part in wrestling too, where I'm not allowed to say this. I have to pick a side. I get along great with both guys. I like both guys, and I think both guys are incredible talents. Randy's proven it with his track record, obviously, with way more than two plus decades. And Ken, I think, got eaten up by the political machine. If they wouldn't have pushed Ken to the point where he was, nor put everything into the microphone, the promo, the shirts, the money in the bank, if he didn't have the talent. You don't lose the talent as you get there and get more reps. I do believe it was somewhat politically natured. I'm not doubting that Randy landed pretty high. He didn't land on his head, but I have no doubt that his shoulders and his traps, one of them or both of them, was sore. But was that a previous thing? Like I said, he has a history of having those shoulder issues and other issues. I don't know. Has Cena ever said anything? Because there were stories circulating that Cena wasn't a fan of Ken as well.
That's what I was going to ask you. I've never heard John Cena's reasoning.
I've never heard any reasoning from it either, but I had heard rumblings that it was both guys. Now, this is a year after I was gone, so this is second, third-hand information. But if Randy goes to management and says, I never want to work this guy again, and this guy's figured in, he's at least going to get knocked down a peg or 3 or 4. He's not going to be working that tier, because if Randy doesn't want to work him, do you think Cena does? Do you think MVP does? Do you think... I'm just saying all the guys I'm looking at right now that are in this ring at this time, do you think any of these guys, wrestlers are not known for standing on their own and going counter to what the locker room wants? And no doubt Taker knows about it too. So it's a domino effect of everything. So maybe Ken ended up getting let go because it's like, well, we kind of nipped this in the bud, because it's going to be kind of a mutiny of everybody saying, we don't want to work this guy.
How much of it, I'm going to get to more reasons in a minute, but how much of it do you think was that Cena and Orton at the time maybe saw Kennedy as a threat?
Could very well be. I think Randy, though, Randy's, even at this time in 2009, and Cena, throw Cena in there. I don't know why guys like this would even consider protecting their spot, because there's nobody more figured in from a third generation standpoint than Randy Orton, who's gotten more chances than most people would. And he obviously has earned his spot. He made their second and third chances not be something that blew back in their faces, the management and office and ownership. Cena's proven to be a draw time and time again, and now he's a Hollywood star. How does a Triple H or a Shawn Michaels or anybody, why should you worry about your spot? You're figured in and you perform and have a niche that nobody could ever take away. Matter of fact, when Cena comes back, he's just as over, if not more over. Rock proves that too. So Ken, I don't know if they're threatened by him, but maybe he's just not fitting into the mold that they think he should fit into.
In 2007, I mean, you mentioned injuries as well, but there were a couple of things that really didn't do himself any favors in quite a few interviews, including one with The Sun that I've got the podcast of still. In the wake of the Chris Benoit incident, he claimed that WWE's wellness policy helped him get off steroids. And then within weeks, he got popped for steroid usage. So then he did another interview a few months afterwards where he basically admitted, yeah, I lied, and I had to lie, and that it was his body and he should be making his own decisions and not WWE as far as what he takes. Now, obviously, from the corporate side, WWE, they've sort of made these promises in the wake of the Eddie Guerrero death, and then further on, doubled down after Chris Benoit killed himself and his family. So at this point, Kennedy or Ken Anderson really is not doing his career any favors by firstly lying about steroid abuse, but how could he, apart from just not taking them, how could he tell the truth about it at the time? And then in subsequent interviews, he sort of doubles down on, yes, I'm taking them and I need them and I should be able to take them, I guess.
Do you think that was the origin that led up to this? Was that the true origin instead of the boys being the origin of it? Do you think the office and management, see, they can't just come out and fire some guys. They almost want a guilt-free release. Oh, it wasn't us. We tried. They couldn't get over. They couldn't draw, all this stuff, or that steroid thing. That's what I said before about getting heat. You said he did an interview and he said something that did not favor or made the company look favorable. And also, if he denied using the steroids, this is speculation on this part. He denied doing the steroids, which just about everybody does who's on them. Then he gets popped for it right after that. The timing of that is more than coincidental in my speculative mind. Did your antennas go up with that?
It was interesting. Yeah, it was interesting. Maybe, I don't know, maybe thought you could cheat the system. Who knows?
No, I'm not saying that part. I'm saying the system was in place and the system was utilized
To
after.
trip him up, yeah.
Yes.
Well, I mean, they were testing more heavily at that time as well. I mean, they were to a point with after Eddie Guerrero in 2006. Then there was the Signature Pharmacy scandal. Benoit, they were ratcheting up the testing, and he got caught. I mean, in fairness, they weren't ratcheting up and doubling down on trying to weed out steroid abuse and other drug abuse because of Mr. Kennedy. They were doing that for bigger reasons, and I suspect that I'm not sure that he was targeted. Is my answer.
Well, let me ask you this
I don't have
question.
enough evidence.
I'm asking the questions now.
Right.
All right. Were there other people? I want everybody to comment and tell me what you think. Were there other people at the same exact time that should have got popped as well and didn't?
Now you're asking me to do research.
No, I'm saying in general, you got to think there's somebody. There's at least one other person on TV that's obviously doing stuff and isn't getting popped.
Well, was Mr. Kennedy in the right circle of friends? Apparently not, if John Cena and Randy Orton weren't fans of him.
I don't know. I'm going to leave that up to everybody out there.
Be that as it may, as I say, the first couple of years, Ken Kennedy, the character, was really doing well in WWE. As I say, won Money in the Bank, was going to be the WWE champion, was going to be Vince McMahon's son. His name, Kennedy, came from Vincent Kennedy McMahon. So they had a lot of plans for him. If, let's say, the interviews around the Benoit stuff and steroids, etc., didn't get out, and let's say a couple of other things didn't happen, do you think Ken would have actually been a top guy? I'm not just saying won the title, like a Jack Swagger, he won a world title, he is a world champion, then he loses it again, then they move on. Could he have been a long-term top guy in your opinion?
Yeah, because he can cut a promo. He's a character. He has the catchphrases to go along with it, the things that make you connect with the fans. His work was as basic as possible, which was great because he was a character. He talked, he had mannerisms, he was over the top. He had he reminded me a little bit of Rocky in a way with the way he kind of carried himself, a little bit of mix between, what he reminds me of in current day is LA Knight in a lot of ways. He just had his own cadence, the way to talk, what he did. Yeah, I think he would have, once he broke through and he proved that he could, say, carry shows or maybe ratings or even pay-per-views and do things, he would forever be upper mid to main event. Perennial.
What do you think of his work in TNA and Impact? Because I don't think that gets remembered as much, because obviously WWE is by far the biggest show. But I mean, as Mr. Anderson, he had a pretty darn good run in TNA.
He was a top guy. He was a top guy. His potential, at least in that environment, his potential was reached. Whatever he thought he might have done in WWE, he did it in TNA. I've never, all three guys, Cena, Orton, and him, never had any crosswords or any kind of anything. Always had very good conversations with all three of them. I've had more recent ones with Ken, but it's just one of those things. But in the wrestling locker room, if those two don't get along with them, I think nobody feels like they're allowed to, at least on the surface.
Yeah, I think with Mr. Kennedy, he's one of the greatest what could have beens. You know, and just an interview here, a backdrop there. If those things hadn't happened, who knows how far he could have
And I
gone.
feel bad because I want everybody to be able to make money, and he could have made enough money to never need wrestling after he was done with WWE.
Absolutely. On that basis, we're going to shut down the show. So
Every
once
time
again,
you say that, I get scared.
well,
Until
I'm about
next
to say
week.
podcast.
No, you said shut down.
Shut down this edition of the Stevie Richards Show, episode 18. On that basis, thank you everybody for watching. We're out every single Friday. Please tell your friends and enemies and whoever else, you know, we're going to try and get. I'd love to get 100,000 subscribers by the end of the year. I don't think that's going to happen, but I think we could get to 70. Something like 75. I think that'd be a pretty good milestone. So we might have to start doing like a subscriber drive. Once again, Stevie has got the fitness channel that I encourage you all to check out. He is apparently maybe soon going to have the gaming channel, which is going to take place of the old analysis YouTube channel, which has still got like just under 100,000 subs. So I'd be ashamed to waste it, for goodness sake, if nothing else. And also, once again, the Patreon as well. What can people expect from the Patreon, Stevie?
Well, the Patreon has all exclusive content, including our pre and post show here at episode 18 and every episode, show notes, and also other production elements like had a meeting with Chris about the audio issues, which, by the way, don't use a 16 gig micro SD card with the Rodecaster Pro 2. I swapped it out for a bigger one. Sorry, Chris. So we might have some inconsistencies with the audio, but we are on our way to fixing those. Also had John Worthy, basically the song that most Patreon people heard on the previous Wrestling Analysis channel. So definitely perks, $1 and $8 perks. Thinking about removing the coaching tier for now, because on Patreon, it's kind of hard to do the one-off kind of one-on-one payment type thing. So I might remove that and put that somewhere else to be able to do that. So patreon.com/Stevie Richards, as you saw over the past few seconds, we have the ticker up there. Hopefully it gets to a point where it will be a perspective split screen with the scrolling text. But we do appreciate all the interaction. Love to get to 100,000 subscribers, but the interaction, the comments, the likes, and the current subscribers are much, much appreciated.
We will see you again next Friday. Until then, see you later.